analysis, my simple prescription is ask only 3 questions: what, why, and how. You will get 50% of the answers. What should I do? Why should I do? And then how should I go about? And the next question is, where should I get the literature? Whom should I contact? And by when I should finish the work. So simple questions. What should I do? Why should I do? And how should I do? Will answer your questions. And then our problem today is also with regard to sampling. How much sampling is good? Because we go on collecting so much information, but all that remains as information doesn't really become knowledge. There's a difference between information and knowledge. So kindly think about it. And then at this time, I can only say one thing. What you do is a process: planning, collection of data, analysis, and all that. But the way forward, is very important, because today, for example, we have about 500 people in our webinar. Each of us come from different backgrounds. We come from villages, we come from cities, we come from different family backgrounds. So each of us can look at a research subject in a very different way. So when you prescribe the way forward, what we are interested in is what value you add to the whole subject. So what interpretation, and then next is the foresight, what kind of a value in terms of foresight. Next, coming generation, what should they do? These are interesting things. Now, this is with regard to research methodology. Now, when it comes to data analysis, people have been asking us, what data, how much data is enough, and how much is too much. So this is where we are talking about volume of the data, velocity of the data, speed with which we collect, the variety of the data, that is also very important, and finally the value of the data. Because many of us, in the research process we have seen, we collect so much material. So when we sit down finally after 2 years to write down the thesis, we are totally we ourselves are confused. So from confusion to clarity, we need to take out all that data, because today is the date of information explosion. You can get data at the click of the button, but all the data has to be converted into meaningful knowledge. And that is where we are requesting you, first of all, you assess how much resource you have at your disposal. Do you have a project for 1 crore? Do you have a project for 15 lakhs? So accordingly, you have to decide the sampling size, the methodology, the amount of data collection, and all these kinds of things. But data should be consistent, repeatable, accurate, authentic, relevant. Now, most of them, for example, COVID era, you are seeing the kind of everyday TV channels bring out so many analyses. Now, are the data based on reliable statistics? That is what is very, very important. I'm sure our experts would talk about it. But at this time, our main concern is confusion to clarity, and only critical data, not necessary to collect. You take any topic, there will be so much information. But what is critical to my study in the primary, in the secondary, and the tertiary domains? You please decide. Now, big data analysis has become, a huge discussion. I'm sure all of you are familiar with big data analysis, and then statistical analysis, very, very specific methods to be analyzed, to be employed. Now, last point is the intellectual property rights management, IP literacy. Those of us, all of us who are working as researchers, should be well aware of the IP rights, IP infringements, and then IP issues that come up. So if you have something to patent at the end of the research process, how to go about copyrights, all those kinds of things. So today, the research methodology, data analysis is a huge subject. And this is with this background, the Karnataka Science Technology Academy has embarked upon this very ambitious 4-day workshop, being, as I said, coordinated very ably by the CEO of the Academy, Dr. Ramesh, 2 other colleagues, Dr. Srinivas and Dr. Umesh. So they have put in a lot of efforts, and I cannot thank our resource experts adequately. Thank you so much, sirs, for coming, being with us for the next 4 days. Now, with these words, I would like to once again welcome all of you, and then request the youngsters to imagine as much as possible, to innovate, then incubate, and then interpret, and then even as you go along the prescribed path, because research is a process that we have to go along the prescribed path. But even as you go along the prescribed path, don't get into beaten tracks. Do something new, do something exciting, do something that you can be proud of, because the research age is research span is only about 10 years in our lives. After that, it's all repetition. Only first 10 years we can do things very differently. We can dare to do things differently. We can take risks. So please take risks and bring something new to science, something new to this society. With these words, once again, thank you very much. Wish you all the very best. We look forward to be with you in the next 4 days. But after that also, we want to be in touch with you, youngsters, researchers. We want you to be in touch with the academy as you grow, as you go along in your research process. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful talk, research methodology. And now I request Dr. A.M. Reddy, sir. Dr. Yes, sir.
Uttam Kumar, good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Thanks for accepting our invitation.
It's my pleasure, sir. It's my pleasure.
So now we have with us Dr. Uttam Kumar, sir, Assistant Professor and Infosys Foundation Career Development Professor. Dr. Uttam Kumar, sir, holds a bachelor's degree in Computer Science from Visvesvaraya Technological University, Belgaum, Diploma in Advanced Computing from CSTeP, Pune, Master's degree in Geoinformation Science from the University of the Netherlands, and Ph.D. in Algorithms for Geospatial Data Analysis from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Sir worked as a project assistant and a research associate at IIIT Bengaluru and as a visiting scientist at GISC Lab, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, IIT Bombay. Sir moved to NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Ames Research Center, Moffett Field, Mountain View, California, USA, as a NASA postdoctoral fellow, and subsequently served as a visiting scientist at NASA for almost 4 years. Sir earned professional certifications in data science, particularly computational data analytics and machine learning from MIT, big data from Stanford University, spatial computing from University of Minnesota, and in geospatial intelligence and revolution from Pennsylvania State University, USA. Sir has published more than 30 research papers in national and international journals, 6 book chapters, 49 papers in conference proceedings, and 8 technical reports. Sir has delivered 61 invited guest lectures by different institutions and organizations in India and abroad. Sir is the reviewer of 24 national and international scientific journals, reviewer for several conferences, and has served as session chair and judge in several conferences and also in competitions. Sir is a member of IEEE, ACM, AGU, IEI, and OSGO, ISRS, ACS, IEA Engineering. Sir has received several awards including the Institute of Engineers India, Young Engineers Award, NASA Group Achievement Award by NASA, Washington DC, Hubble's Peer Review Award in 2017, Certified Sentinel of Science Award in 2016 in the Earth and Planetary Sciences, Best Paper Award in 2015, International Conference on Machine Learning and Data Analytics, UC Berkeley, Best Paper Award, International Conference on Remote Sensing and Application, Los Angeles, Best Paper Award, Working Geologico, Minero, Spain, in Geospatial Scientist Award, New Delhi, Best Paper Award, Indian Society of Information Paper, and Best Paper Award by IIT Bengaluru. This is introduction about Dr. Kumar sir. Is a good friend of mine also. So we welcome you, sir, for giving this talk and this session, sir. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Srinivas, for the elaborate introduction. It was not required, although. Thank you very much. our CEO, Dr. A.M. Ramesh, and Chairman S. Ayyappan for the inauguration address. And I truly appreciate your efforts towards development of scientific um, prospects in India and among the youth communities in particular. So I appreciate the efforts done by Karnataka Science and Technology Academy. It's truly a remarkable effort put towards society development. So thank you both of you for the inaugural address, and thank you Srinivas for the introduction. So with these kind words, I would like to go ahead and start the presentation. So am I audible clearly? Okay. How do I share my screen? It's disabled. Share content is disabled. Srinivas, how do I share my
I
screen?
just
Okay, sure.
got it now.
Yeah, I think, yes, I can now see that. Yes. I hope the slides are now visible.
Yes, sir, visible, sir.
Okay. Good morning, all of you. All the audience, welcome to the workshop. And I am privileged to take up the first session of the workshop. And I hope I would be able to convey something useful to all of you. Thank you for participating in the workshop. And I look forward to interact with you even in the future. So let me begin the first topic of the workshop on research methodology and defining the research problem. So in fact, defining the research problem is such an important topic that it takes sometimes months to years together to come up with a problem that is really of relevance to the society or the market or a particular audience in that context. So let me go through the slides and help you to understand how do we define the research methodology and how do we come up with very interesting research problems. Okay, so I broadly work in the area of data science, applied machine learning, spatial computing, remote sensing and GIS is my broader area, and also I work on image processing and database management system. So all these topics are somewhat related to each other. Therefore, when you work in let's say remote sensing, you also deal with lot of images. Hence, we need lot of image processing techniques, and to store uh, all these spatial data, that is the GIS data, we need some kind of a database. So therefore, database management system in particular, in spatial database are of much demand today, and a lot of spatial computing techniques are required to handle these large spatial data sets. So I would now uh, outline the contents of my talk today. So I would first go with the questions, or go with the reasoning, um, why we should do research. Okay, what are the reasons to do research? And then I will switch on to the definition of research. Okay, so first question is why, and then what it is. Okay, then subsequently we will go into purpose and types of research and different research stages. Okay, then finally we will try to look into the research in broader perspectives, and then focus on how do we formulate a research problem, how do we do the literature review, how do we come up or narrow down to a research objective or objectives, multiple objectives, how do we write research questions, and then what is how do we decide upon methods, and what is the difference between methodology versus methods. Okay, finally, let us look at some of the criteria for a good research. Okay, and then I will try to highlight some important problems that we as a researcher face. Although it is easy to overcome the problems, but there are some problems that we need to be aware of. Okay, and finally, I will try to show you how to write research papers. Okay, so let us now begin with the question as to why do we need to do research. Okay, there could be different ways, different problems to solve. Okay, to that motivates us to do research. Okay, for example, even if you are trying to solve n number of problems, it might be possible that out of n problems only few are valid problems, few are scientifically valid problems, are and other problems may not be equally valid or may not be of importance, right? So even to find the problem that is valid and that is logical, we need to do some research. Okay, when you have alternate answers, alternate plans, okay, how do you know that which plan or which answer is correct, which solution is feasible? Okay, even for selecting a best solution or a best plan, we need to do research. Okay, research also helps you to get an idea of what we know and what we don't know. Okay, so research actually builds up our knowledge, and the fact that what we don't know, we do not realize it easily until we have done some amount of reading, some amount of research on the net, or browsing on the net, or looking at some papers, etc. So research also helps us to know helps us to know what we don't know. Okay, probably when we have some assignment either in the institute or in any research organization, or given in any project, etc. So even while trying to do an assignment, we do research, knowingly or unknowingly we do research that can span over a wide field, as Dr. Ayyappan rightly pointed out in his inaugural lecture. And then some people do research for satisfaction. Although this number may not be significant, but I have met few people who do research just to be happy in life. Okay, so there could be n number of motivating ways or n number of different factors that could lead you to do meaningful research. Okay, so now there are there are multi-dimensional perspective to the problem on defining why we need to do research. Okay, simple answer could be because you wanted a degree. Okay, maybe a master's degree or a PhD degree, so you did research. Or you wanted to get more respect in the society, so you wanted to become a scientist or hold a PhD degree, etc. So you did research. Okay, or some people have enthusiasm to face challenges, or to solve some very difficult problems. Okay, so then people do research. Okay, some people want to enjoy this intellectual property. Okay, or feel this intellectual joy, so therefore they do research. So there are different reasons why people do research, and in fact all of these above, in some way or the other, they serve the society. They serve the society by increasing the standards of living for science and technology. Okay, so ultimately the goal is for the benefit of the society, and we try to see that whatever we do research or whatever inventions are made, it somehow or in some way tries to improve the standard of livings uh, of a common person or of common citizen. Okay, so there could be different motivational factors that could lead you or that could persuade you to do meaningful research. Okay, now uh, coming back to the same topic on why we should do research. Okay, looking at in a more formal way, Okay, looking at in a more formal way, okay, research is done to explore a poorly understood situation or phenomena. Okay, so we assume that there is no previous systematic study. Okay, therefore we want to explore our phenomena in more detail, and therefore we do research. Okay, we also do research to describe a situation or a phenomena. Okay, so not only explore but also describe. Not only explore but also describe. Okay, so phenomena is not known, but phenomena is known, but not systematically described or not systematically explored. So we try to understand or describe the phenomena. Okay, research is also done to explain something, at some level of understanding. Okay, that could cause a phenomena. Okay, and then research is also carried out to predict the future. So here predict the future doesn't mean a human being's future, but as such what will happen to certain phenomena given certain parameters or given certain conditions. Okay, so usually predicting the future is with respect to some aspect, some phenomena which is mathematically modeled, and then you control the environment. Okay, you control the environment with a limited number of parameters, constraints, etc., and then you try to see what could happen in future in a given scenario. Okay, so this could also be extrapolated to unobserved locations. Okay, so if something happened in a given place x, can it also occur in another place y? Okay, so therefore all these predictions, futurist time series predictions, they require computational model which can generate alternate scenarios to reflect the situation on the ground at a different time period. Okay, finally all of these factors in some way or the other, they help in taking right decisions, logical decisions, holistic decisions for a given set of problem. Okay, so given given the by starting with the yeah, so I will definitely share the PPT, no problem. Okay, so looking at the reasons why we need to do research, looking at the various motivations why we should do research, let us try to look at a formal definition or informal definition, both in a multidimensional way. Okay, right. So as we saw that people do research can also be explained in different ways. In a similar way, in defining the word or defining the term research can also be done in a multidimensional way. In a very simple language, research is an art of scientific investigation. Okay, research, actually the word research comes from the French word researcher, which means to look for again, or to investigate, or to attempt to find out. Okay, so all these are synonymous words, synonymous term, which actually says that you are trying to investigate, to find, to look into, etc. Okay, so research is done to discover something that was previously completely or partially unknown. Okay, people look into discovering some solution or discovering something that was probably unknown to humans or partially known to humans, or it was not well understood. Okay, so people do research in search for knowledge. Okay, so finding out, here the word find out or finding out is done in a systematic way, is done in a scientific way. So research is often carried out in a systematic way, in a scientific way. Okay, in order to get pertinent information, on different topics. Okay, and we assume that, or we believe that the information on these topics are not known. Okay, so all of these terms are synonymous. They help us to understand what is actually research. How do you define research? Okay, so research finally helps you to acquire knowledge. Okay, in developing your understanding, and it helps us to collect facts and figures, that is your data, and finally to interpret these facts and figures. Okay, so that you build up a picture of the world, or build up the picture of the subject around the topic. Okay, so we do investigation, An investigation leads us to uncover some interesting facts or new facts. Okay. Finally, when you do a research on a given topic, you are nicely able to categorize, describe, explain, evaluate, compare, correlate, and predict facts and figures. Okay, so while doing research, you are able to actually do so many things, knowingly or unknowingly. You are able to categorize, describe, explain, evaluate, compare, correlate, predict facts and figures. That is the data on which you are working. Okay, so having given a formal definition of what is research, how do you define research, let us try to remember the 5 W's. Okay, what is your research? We should first ask, what is your research? Okay, why do you want to do research? What is the purpose of the research? Okay, and and how do you do a research? So what, why, and how are 3 important questions, as Dr. Ayappan rightly indicated in the inaugural session. What, why, how are 3 important questions that one should ask while doing a research or before starting a research. And then subsequent relevant questions are, who are the participants, who are the stakeholders, who will be benefited. Okay, where are you going to do your research? It's a special question. So you could maybe working in a lab, or you could define a study area geographically, etc. Okay, and when? So when defines a time period, in what time span, or in what time period you are going to pursue your research. Okay, so now let us look at the purpose and different types of research. So the essential purpose of research is to discover answers to questions, okay, through the application of scientific procedures. So we are trying to answer questions, okay, while applying procedures which are established, which are scientific, which have been proven by scientists or researchers around the world. Okay, so broadly, most research fall under quantitative or qualitative. Okay, when collecting and analyzing data, quantitative research deals with numbers and statistics. Many of you already may be working with lots of numbers in different domains: computer science, electronics, statistics, mathematics. Okay, while qualitative research deals with words and meanings. Okay, for example, you might rate something, or you might give a categorical variable to some outcome. For example, good, very good, or excellent. Okay, so these are all qualitative terms. Okay, they define the quality, whereas quantitative terms deals more on numbers, data, statistics, facts, etc. Okay, so let us look at their definition in a more detailed way. Quantitative research is expressed in numbers and graphs. Okay, these numbers are used to test or confirm theories and assumptions. Okay, so you have data that essentially consists of numbers. Okay, and you use these numbers to perform or to confirm certain theories or certain assumptions that you have realized before you are trying to do before you started framing out your problem. Okay, so this type of research can be used to establish generalizable facts. Okay, so common quantitative methods will include experiments that you will perform from your data, okay, or observations that you do using some instruments, okay, or data that you collect using some surveys, okay, or some questionnaire. So common trends nowadays is to float your questionnaire on the web, and then people respond, and then you use those questionnaire as a kind of survey. Okay, and finally use those numbers to do some quantitative research. On the other hand, qualitative research is more expressed in words. Okay, and these are used to understand concepts, thoughts, and experiences. Okay, qualitative research are used to understand concepts, thoughts, or experiences. Okay, they enable you to gather actually in-depth insights of the topics which may require more exploration. Okay, so common ways to do qualitative research is to do a survey, to have a interview, questionnaire, etc., where the respondents' answers are described in some kind of words or phrases, etc. Okay. Now, traditionally, research has been broadly categorized as basic research, applied research, problem-solving research, descriptive, analytical, primary, secondary, conceptual, empirical. Okay, basic research is done, okay, for knowledge enhancement. For example, in theory, in physics, in chemistry, you might have heard people doing basic research. Okay, so this is just to enhance the knowledge. Okay, and also to for the welfare of humans, animals, plants. Okay, so it is of not, it may not be of immediate relevance to the society or may not generate a commercial product, but it would definitely help you to enhance your knowledge. Okay, applied research, on the other hand, are meant to solve practical problems. Okay, these are means to solve practical problems rather than acquiring knowledge as in the basic research. Okay, so here the aim of the applied research is that it will in some sense improve human life. Okay, and it will also solve some social and real life problems. Okay, most of the research done currently fall under applied research. Most of the companies, most of the core areas, thrust areas are currently applied research. Okay, because it directly or indirectly, both ways helps to improve the living conditions of people. Okay, there are some research which are more focused on certain problems. Okay, they focus on solving certain problems. For example, these are widely practiced in industries where the goal is to solve a given problem. Okay, for example, market research. So here the research will be focused only on the market data. So these are broadly classified as problem solving research. Okay, so we saw basic research, applied research, and problem solving research. On the other hand, research is also broadly classified as descriptive and analytical. In descriptive, we try to analyze research in terms of description words. In analytical research, we use more of data. Okay, analyze the data, use logics, etc. And then there are primary and secondary research depending upon the type of data, whether data is collected by you or it has been generated by some other source, or is your data the input to your research is the output of some other research. And then there are some research which are conceptual versus empirical. So conceptual research are more based on concepts, okay, ideas, theories, and empirical research are most based on experiments. So they are mostly based on data sets that you collect. So you perform certain experiments, okay, um, and then based on the results, based on the outcome, you decide you decide what type of research it is. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes you may have to combine one or two of these. Okay, one of two or these two to formulate a research problem. Okay, there was a question right now, so I'm trying to answer that. So sometimes you may have to do a little bit of basic research in order to jump to applied research. Okay, and finally, applied research may also be used in trying to solve certain very specific problem, thereby trying to look into specific problem for a given context. Okay, so then it falls under the problem solving research. Okay, now we will now try to see different ways in which research has been divided. Okay, one is design experiments. Okay, so these experiments are either done in a laboratory or done in a field. Okay, so here the researcher will impose the treatments, okay, maybe in a fully controlled or maybe in a semi-controlled situation. Okay, and then the researcher will measure the response or observe the response, right? The second one is systematic observation. So here the resource comes from a survey or from community meetings. Okay, here the researcher makes measurements or observations according to a plan. So there is initially a plan is set, and then the researcher will observe something or measure something with respect to a plan. Okay, but there is not complete control on the process. There is not complete control on the process. Okay. Then comes the system design. So here the researcher will himself or herself design a system. Okay. For example, this system could be a model. Okay. This system could be a model, and the researcher will then try to prove or try to show that um, this model what the researcher has designed is performing better or is better than previous models that have been proposed. Okay, so generally system design types of models are widely practiced in fields of computer science, algorithms, etc. Okay, then comes synthesis. So here the researcher will impose a new conceptual framework. In a synthesis research, the researcher will impose a new conceptual framework, okay, on the data that has been gathered earlier, that has been gathered earlier, and the researcher will eventually try to establish if it is better or more unifying explanation of the from the data that has been previously captured. Okay, then comes modeling. So here the researcher will build a conceptual or a computational model. So most research actually starts with concept. Okay, you first try to lay down a concept draft or a concept paper, and then eventually convert your concept paper to a computational model. Okay, so here the model is evaluated in how much success it has obtained. Okay, in reproducing the behavior of a natural system. So here the model is evaluated by how much evaluated in terms of success, how much success it has achieved in reproducing the behavior of a natural system. Then comes comparative studies. So many of us in some way or the other always do some kind of a comparison, but when it is done with respect to some subject, some idea, okay, then we say that it's a comparative studies. Okay, so when you learn, for example, technique A, technique B, technique C, and then try to see which one is better for your application, okay, we say that it's a comparative study. Okay, so here the researchers must argue that all relevant factors have been considered. So you try to compare one, two, or three, or n number of techniques, assuming or informing what all factors you have considered while doing the experiment. So in most chances, one will believe or one will assume that these types of comparative studies are done on a common platform, okay, so that there is no biasness against any of the methods that you are trying to evaluate. Finally, data mining is a popular type of research, okay, which has gained lot of importance in academia, industry, etc. And probably because of the big data era, because of large amounts of data currently available, people use data mining techniques to find out patterns that are not trivial, and that may not be easily visible or easily understandable to a normal human being. So in some sense, these talk about very large databases, also called big data. Okay, and you try to analyze this big data to look for patterns that may not be trivial, that may be unexpected, and it may give you some more knowledge, insights into the problem. Okay, so having seen different types of research in which they are applied, from design experiment, systematic observation, system design, synthesis, modeling, comparing two or more techniques, data mining, etc., we will now look into the various stages that are present in a research. research can be a short-term research or a long-term research. In a long-term research, you have three stages. Okay, reconnaissance stage is a stage of unstructured observation. Okay, then you have a reflective stage where you design hypothesis and then try to work on those hypotheses, and finally the testing stage where you perform experiments or observations which are more formally structured, okay, to verify how to prove or disprove these hypotheses that you have formulated in the reflective stage. Okay, so I was talking about hypothesis, right? That you formulate a hypothesis in stage 2, okay, and then you try to verify these hypotheses in stage 3, which is also called the testing stage, right? So I hope you are already aware of the term hypothesis. Okay, so I may not deal with the term hypothesis in a statistical framework because that is a completely independent topic that comes under data science, but as a layman's language, okay, as a layman's language, not talking statistically, hypothesis is generally a tentative explanation for an observation or scientific problem. Okay, so the key word here is a tentative explanation or a statement for an observation or a scientific problem, okay, that we need to test further or that we need to investigate further. Okay, so quick small bullets on hypothesis. It's a tentative theory that we have to prove or disprove from data sets. Okay, or it's an idea or a suggestion that is based on known facts. Okay, and we need to investigate these facts further to prove or disprove the hypothesis. Okay, it is what we believe to be true explanation or true state of a nature. Okay, and sometimes hypotheses are also generated or formulated based on previous works or based on some first principles. Finally, these hypotheses are not yet tested, so we must design some experiments, okay, to test this hypothesis. Now coming to the research design, how do we design a research, right? So we started our topic with research stages. Okay, so we talked about three different stages in a long-term view. Okay, and then I introduced you to the term hypothesis. Okay, and then now we are looking into research design. Fine. So what is a research design? Design. So look at the keyword here. It's a design. You are doing something. You are planning something. Okay, you are designing something. Okay, so this design, it provides a framework. It provides a framework. Okay, maybe in a certain fashion. Okay, on how do we collect and analyze data that may be structured or unstructured. So maybe a structured example of a structured data is a database management system where you have several rows and columns. Rows are also called tuples, columns are also called fields, and a collection of rows and columns, that is tuples and fields, is called a relation. Okay, and a collection of such relation is called a database. Okay, and the ways in which you manage the data is called a database management system. Okay, so a research design is used to craft a framework for the collection and analysis of data that may be structured or unstructured. If it is structured, it will be in the form of a database. Okay, how the choice on how do you design the research, okay, it reflects decisions about the priority that you have given to certain variables, certain processes. Okay, the way you define the research, it reflects some kind of your decision about the priority that you have given to certain research processes or certain parameters. Okay, research design also expresses causal connections between the variables that you have considered in this table. Okay, or while doing data collection. Okay, then it research design is generalizes to a larger group of individuals. Okay, than those actually forming part of the investigation. So research design is broadly assumed or perceived on a larger group of individuals rather than small part or small team who are doing the investigation. So research design focuses on larger groups. They are perceived to focus on larger groups of individuals. Okay. Research design is also used to understand the behavior and meaning of that behavior in its specific social context. Okay. So given the context, you may have to design your research differently. Okay, so in order to understand the behavior in different contexts, the research design are perceived differently. Okay, sometimes you also have a temporal dimension, that is time series data or time or observations made over time. Okay, so these you have to design your research in such a way that it also captures the temporal variation of the data sets. It also captures the temporal variations happening over the data set. Okay, so these time series observations T1, T2, T3, etc. they may be sometimes interconnected. Okay, events can be interconnected or events can be independent. For example, rainfall. Okay, rainfall today and rainfall tomorrow are independent events. Okay, today's rainfall has nothing to do with tomorrow's rainfall, but there are certain interactions that are dependent on the previous event. Okay, for example, the spreading of coronavirus disease, COVID-19 disease, are in some sense related to previous event. If somebody has or is infected, okay, it's his or her movement, spatial movement, and interaction with different people, which has happened in the previous time, also is useful to determine how it will spread in the future, right? So therefore, lot of diffusion models, etc., are used to visualize this kind of spread of diseases. So here there is an interaction of events from time T1 to T2 to T3, and Markov random fields is a very good technique to handle events that that are decided by what has happened in the previous stages. Okay, so having seen the research design principles, having seen the hypothesis and research design principles, let us now move into the research process. Okay, research process is actually the most important topic for today's talk. Okay, and it deals with what we should do once we have decided the research agenda. So here we will focus on each of these topics, and what I have observed is that formulating a research problem, okay, is perhaps the most difficult part. Okay, once this is clear, okay, automatically you are able to define the research objective, define the research question, formulate a hypothesis, and also select a method. Once this is clear, all subsequent steps are easy to achieve. Okay, and I have seen met few students and some of my own friends who have spent 3 years or even more than that in trying to find a very good research problem. Okay, this is more evident in certain research where you are trying to do basic theory, or where you are doing basic research. For example, in physics, okay, where lot of fundamental research has already been accomplished, it is very hard to come up with a new problem and work on it immediately. People have to struggle, people have to spend lot of time reading theories, papers, journals, etc., to formulate a research problem. Although in newer areas such as in computer science, machine learning, data science, cryptography, etc., formulating a research problem is relatively easy, because still these are new subjects that have not matured over time. Okay, so lot of emphasis should be given on formulating a research problem. Okay, so let's try to cover each of these topics, and then we will end up the talk by looking at how to write the report. Okay, so we may not be able to have sufficient time to dedicate on how to write a report, but I would be in a position to give you some broader ideas. Okay, so uh, okay, so let me go through the steps. So how do we start doing research? We first choose a problem. Okay, choosing a problem also means defining a research problem. Okay, defining a research problem. So here I am talking in broadly. I'm talking broadly about what areas you are interested. Okay, well, some of you might be interested in algorithms, some of you might be interested in computer science, some of you might be interested in models, etc. So these are broader terms: computer science, models, algorithms. Okay, so we are first trying to define the area in which we want to focus, in which we want to work. Okay, why is this important? This is important because this decides what type of literature you should read. Okay, what type of papers you should read. Given that there are numerous papers available on internet on different with different publishers. Okay, it is difficult to narrow down on certain literatures that is relevant to you. So therefore we must first define the area in which we are interested and then look for relevant literatures. Okay, once you have got through the literatures, it is important to evaluate the literature. Okay, and then uh, this term, evaluating the literature, helps you to finally formulate the hypothesis. Okay, we will spend more time on formulating hypothesis in the subsequent slides. So then we state the research objective, questions, or formulate the hypothesis. Then look at what are the methods that can be used to do your research. Then design a data collection strategy. Okay, and then analyze and interpret the data, and then finally write the report and then disseminate the report to the audience, to the stakeholders, to the partners, etc. Right, so this is the overall cycle of how do you start the research. And you will see that you start by thinking and planning. Okay, then you propose something and try to discover. You gather some data and analyze those data sets. Okay, and then the results what you get, you just try to write in the form of a paper, technical report, journal article, etc., and publish. And then it has, assuming that it will have impact on certain sections of the society. Okay, it can be industrial community, it can be academic community, it can be a common or a norm common people, etc. Okay, so now let us start with the first topic on defining a research problem. Okay, so what is a research problem? Very broadly, okay, research problem is a general statement of why research should be done. It's a general statement. Okay, it's a general statement on why research should be done. Right. So generally, a research problem is not well understood. It's not clear. It can be addressed by research, though we are not sure whether we will actually be able to come up with a solution. Okay, or we may end up getting no solution. Okay, so it's the getting no solution is not a failure. Okay, it is a message that you tried ways ABC, but ABC didn't give you satisfactory result. So it's not a message of failure, but it's a message to the other researchers that look, don't adapt ABC, this may not give you the desired result. Start and look into technique END. Okay, so failure is always a clue to other researchers to have a new beginning point. Okay, then research problem is it will define a phenomena or context that has not been closely studied. Okay, it can be a contradiction between two or more perspectives, or it can be a situation that is not well understood, or a troubling question. Some people like this troubling question that has yet to be resolved. So these are often open-ended questions. Okay, so all these bullets that are listed here, they they help you to define a research problem. Okay. Many of us in day-to-day life would like to work on situation or relationships that is not well understood. So we collect data in the form of variables, analyze those variables, okay, and then try to look into what is the current status. Okay. So now identifying a research problem can be done by reading recent research, okay, or theory or debates. Okay, I will repeat again. Identifying a research problem can be done by reading recent research or literature, by reading theories, by looking into debates. Okay, all these ultimately help you to find a gap, from what is currently known. Okay, so what is currently known comes from recent research in the form of literature, in the form of thesis. Okay, it comes from books, theories, debates, etc. And if you know what is currently known, you will also be able to know what is currently not known. And this not known is used to find a gap. Okay, so now let us move into the next topic of reading research theory. Yeah, I'm talking about that. How do we find a gap? Okay, so um, you read recent research literatures, journal papers, conference papers, articles. Okay, you read about theory. So when you read about recent literatures, journal articles, conference papers, theories, okay, you will be able to know what is currently known. What is currently known okay. What is currently known to the society? There is some disturbance. Okay, so this helps you to know. Reading recent research theory helps you to know what is currently known to the researchers, what is currently known to the scientific community. If you know what is known, you will be also able to know what is not known. This unknown becomes a gap. This unknown becomes a gap. Okay, so broadly highlighted in this particular slide. Okay, so while trying to define, once you have defined a general statement, okay, we now focus on the literature review. So literature here means uh, journal papers, okay, journal papers or conference papers or theses. Okay, thesis could be master's thesis or PhD thesis, okay, or intellectual property, etc. Okay, so when you review all this, it gives you some kind of information of what is known and what is unknown. Okay, so at the beginning, you can do a research to improve your knowledge. So maybe when you start with zero, okay, and trying to move forward, you first read papers, theories, etc. to improve your knowledge of the subject area in which you are interested. Okay, while improving the knowledge, you are also able to get new ideas and how people conduct research in those relevant areas. Okay, then by reading a few more papers, okay, you will be able to get an idea of what's happening around the world, what's happening in that community, in that subject area. You will be able to identify trends. Okay, and then you will be able to identify what could be new focus areas. Okay, so for example, people, you might have heard people talking about data science is the new future, machine learning is the new future, right? So how do people know? Because people are aware what are the areas that are getting saturated, what are the new areas where there are a lot of scopes. Okay, 5G for example has lot of scope. Internet of things for example is a new area. Okay, so machine learning is probably a new area, AI is probably a new area, right? So cryptography is probably a new area. So these are the areas that you are sure that this has more future. Lot of developments can be taken, can be done. Okay, so papers help you to identify trends and see what are the areas that are probably that will probably gain more importance in the future. Okay, then you identify certain keywords that in which is the focus of your research. Okay, for example, I may be more and more interested in supervised learning, the topic supervised learning, which is a further a topic inside machine learning. So machine learning is quite broad. Within that, I am more interested in supervised learning. So these are my keywords, okay, or terms that needs research. So by knowing the current knowledge, current body of knowledge, by trying to understand the recent trends, by trying to look at what will happen or which areas will be more important in future, by looking at the keywords, you will be able to find out gaps. Okay, so this process is iterative in nature. Okay, iterative in the sense, you may have to keep on doing this again and again and again for lifelong. Okay, because things keep changing, new inventions take place, new papers are published, new conferences are held, and new content is being added to the existing database. So we have to be up to date of what's happening. We have to know what is the state of the art. Okay, so it is not true that if you had formulated an idea in 2015 and you will start working on that idea in 2020, probably somebody would have already worked on that topic for 5 years and lot of papers would have been published. Okay, so then there is no point again working on the same topic. So it is important to keep reading with time, and then you will be updated with what are the current gaps. Okay, then identify people who could be your collaborator, not only from your institute but across institute, across countries, from different universities, research organizations across different continents, and so on. And identify stakeholders who will be benefited from your research. Okay, so having seen literature, having seen on how to define a research problem, how to come up with a research problem, this is the broader topic now. Okay, and then we having seen how to do literature review. Okay, then comes the very important topic, that is formulating a research problem. And it is not wrong to, or it is totally acceptable that you spend more time in trying to define or formulate a correct research problem. Okay, so this research problem will only come if you have done a very good literature review. Okay, literature here means journal papers, journal articles, books, theses, etc. Okay, different sources of information which are up to date. This, so very good literature review will help you to formulate a research problem. Okay, by trying to focus the research gap. Okay, so what are the steps in formulating a research problem? Identify a broad field of subject of area of interest. Okay, then you divide this broader field into smaller sub areas. For example, term machine learning can be again divided into supervised, okay, or unsupervised. Okay, then see which one is more relevant to you, or which one gives you more interest, supervised or unsupervised. If you are trying to work more on supervised learning, then take up this topic. Okay, and then you can again formulate more questions on this topic. So select what is of more interest to you, and then set up research question based on this topic. Okay, for example, which supervised techniques are useful? Okay, or how do you implement supervised techniques? Okay, and there could be a large number of such small questions. Okay, now you can then formulate a hypothesis and see if the I think I have swapped this. So you should first formulate a topic objective here, and then put questions to answer those objectives. I will anyway, I will interchange that. Okay, and then once you have the objectives and the sub objectives and the research questions, then you see how to solve those research problems. Okay. So what is the research problem? Okay, it's a general statement of an issue which requires research. Okay, its nature will suggest appropriate form for its investigation or methods to follow. So when you define a research problem, okay, the nature of the research problem will tell you what type of investigations you should do, what type of methods you should follow on that particular problem. Okay, the research problem should be clearly and concisely stated. Okay, so that the other person reading your research problem is able to understand it. Okay, the research problem should be significant. Okay, it should not be too easy to solve. Okay, and it should one should try that it's not repetition of the previous work, but it is okay, it is perfectly acceptable if you try to solve the same problem, the same previous work in a different way, which is more efficient than the current method. Okay, we should be able to delineate the research problem well, so that its scope is well defined. Its scope is well defined. Okay. Finally, it should be possible to obtain information required to explore the problem. Okay, so without the possibility of having data or having information, it may not be easy to work on a research problem. So we have to see that information or data is easily available. And finally, the last one, it should be possible to draw conclusions related to the problem. So if you are framing a research problem, you should see that it is possible to draw some conclusion from what you have done. Conclusion doesn't mean always always success. Conclusion can both be success and failure, but you should come up with, your experiment should be able to either say yes or no kind of answer, or possibly some hope of trying to frame a different problem that could further investigate in the problem, further investigate the problem that has remained unsolved. Okay, so what are the considerations that one should do while selecting a research problem? It should be of interest to you. Okay, what is the magnitude of the problem? Okay, what are the concepts? How much expertise one has? How much relevance the problem has? What are the data sets available? What are the ethical issues? Okay, so talking about the relevance, okay, it means what particular place, time, or people will you focus? Okay, what aspects will you not be able to tackle? That means what are the limitations? Okay, what will be the consequence of if the problem is not solved? Okay, who will benefit from resolving the problem? So example, it could be management, it could be organization, it could be future researchers, etc. Okay, now this slide is very important. Okay, as per me, so this is very important. Sometimes similar other questions, so when you frame up certain questions, okay, similar other questions crop up in the mind of anyone, maybe researcher, okay, who can well plan his strategy to find answers to all such questions only when the research problem has been well defined. So it is very, very important to well define your research problem. Okay, sometimes similar questions can come up in your mind when you are trying to solve certain problems. Okay, so when you come up with a well defined problem, it is easy to find answers to those questions. Okay, defining a research problem properly is a prerequisite for any study. Defining a proper research problem is a prerequisite for any study. Okay, and is a step of highest importance. Please remember that defining a proper research problem is very important and is of highest importance. Okay, in fact, formulation of a problem is often more essential than its solution. So if the problem is not stated correctly, okay, any solution that you propose may not be able to give you logical solutions. Okay, so it's very important to rightly point out the right question. It's very important to rightly point out the right question while doing the research. So you may come up with solutions which might be right answer to some other problem. Okay, so this could happen when you have not formulated your problem very nicely, or when you have not defined your problem. So what are the techniques in trying to yes, we can define a problem only when you have done a literature survey, because that would give you state of the art currently that has been published or proposed by researchers. Okay, so when we define a problem, okay, one has to lay certain boundaries, okay, certain scope, limitations, okay, within which the study will be conducted. Okay, so we must state what are the limitation boundary conditions under which the study has been taken. Okay, so first is state the problem in a general way, understand the nature of the problem, survey the available literature. We have already spent time on trying to see how do we do literature survey. Okay, discussion to be undertaken for developing ideas, and this is where people come to conferences. So conferences is not about attending a workshop or presenting your paper and then having nice lunch and dinner. Okay, but also to spend time along with your nice lunch and dinner. It is also important to have discussions with eminent people in your area, with people who have nice research track in your area. So you must spend time discussing your topic of interest with those people and seek what is their opinion. Okay, so that will probably give us more possibility in developing ideas, and then it will help us to rephrase the research problem in a way that would be worked on. Okay, so discussing with researchers in similar areas in conferences, on digital media, using blogs is important, but one should not spend too much time, but it is good to seek advice from experts who have worked in that area. Probably they would be able to give more insights to a problem, or look at a problem from a different angle that would help you to rephrase your research problem, and come up with an alternate or nice working proposition. So state the problem. So whatever topics I have stated here, state the problem, understand the nature of problem, discuss the problem, and then rephrase the problem have been discussed here. Maybe you can go through your own, state the problem in a general way with respect to some practical, scientific, or intellectual interest. Okay. For example, the researcher may herself or himself read the concerned subject, okay, and then talk to the subject expert. Okay, then understanding the nature of problem, the researcher needs to discuss the problem with those related to the subject matter to clearly understand the origin of the problem, okay, its nature, objectives, etc. Okay, then discussions for developing ideas. So discussions, actually, as I told earlier, they help researchers to generate new ideas, identify different aspects on the problem, gain suggestions, advices from others. Okay, so discussion should focus on the problem that you are working on, and should also be related to the approaches that you are trying to use to solve the problem. Okay, approaches or techniques or possible solutions that can be adopted to the problem. Finally, with all these discussions, understanding the nature of the problem, okay, understanding the nature of the problem, you try to rephrase your research problem, okay, putting the problem in very specific terms that is feasible, putting the problems in very specific terms that is feasible. Okay, and feasible in the sense you are able to nicely develop a model or formulate a equivalent mathematical model so that you are able to easily prove or disprove it. So mathematical model can also be proved or disproved by developing a hypothesis, by formulating a hypothesis. Okay, so once you have gone through all these steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4, okay, uh, uh, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, okay, it is now easy to put up your problem in a form that is analytical and that can be operational. Okay, that is analytical and operational. I'm spending more time on defining the research problem because I think this is the most important step, as I stated earlier. And once this is clear, probably you will be able to quickly work upon your problem to come up with a possible solution. Some important rules: we must define the technical term. We must state the assumptions which we have used in our theory. What we must state the criteria for selecting the data and for selecting the method. Okay, what is the time? We must define a time, period, and sources of data available, for the problem. And then we must also define the scope of investigation. Okay, or the limitations of your research. Okay, so that one can actually take insights from your experiments, from your study, and may come up with may be able to replicate your study, given that you have already clearly highlighted the scope and limitations of the study. Okay, now coming to research objective. So I have talked, spent I think 10 minutes, almost 10 minutes on how to formulate a research problem. Okay, how to formulate a research problem. So different steps, what we should do, what is relevant to us. Okay, we again I am trying to highlight that this step is of highest importance in the entire research definition. Okay, what are the techniques we should use, what are the precautions we should take, and what are few simple rules that we should take care while defining a research problem. So once you know the research problem, okay, it is not difficult to write research objectives. What are research objectives? Research objectives are statements of what is expected as the output of the research. Okay, so each objective, or you may have one or more objective from your research problem. Okay, each objective may solve one problem or partially solve a problem. Okay, when you complete one objective, let's say in a given 1 month or to 3 months time, you complete certain part of the project. Okay, that could be partially or complete solution, and then you move on to the next objective. So finally, when you complete all your objectives, you are able to provide a solution to the overall research problem. Okay, objectives are mostly broken into list of sub-objectives, and then you convert these sub-objectives into research questions. Okay, so look at the flow. You start with defining a research problem. Okay, then you define your research objective, problem. Okay, and then objective. Okay, and then you break your objective into sub-objectives. Okay, and then for each sub-objective you write sub-objective 1, 2, 3. You write research question 1, research question 2, research question 3. So when you answer these research questions, you are able to answer these sub-objectives, right? And when you answer all the sub-objectives, you are able to answer your research objective, your main research objective. Okay, so research objectives fall broadly under exploratory, descriptive, or diagnostic studies. Okay, exploratory studies are one to gain familiarity with a phenomena, okay, or to achieve new insights. Okay, exploratory, so as the name suggests, you are trying to explore the data, explore the phenomena. Okay, so exploratory data analysis deals with it helps you to gain familiarity with the phenomena, okay, or to achieve new insights, okay, or to achieve new insights. Then the other one is descriptive research. Okay, so descriptive research helps you to portray accurately the characteristics of particular individual. Okay, descriptive research helps you to portray accurately the characteristics of a particular individual, situation, or group. Okay, so you are trying to make a description. Okay, make a description by trying to understand the characteristics of a group or a situation or individuals. Finally, the diagnostic research is used to determine the frequency with which something occurs or with which it is associated with something else. Okay, so studies with this object in view are called diagnostic research. So your research can be either exploratory or it can be descriptive research, and it could be diagnostic research. Okay, then questions questions of the research questions will follow your objectives. Okay, and maybe simple statements which are operational. So once you formulate your objectives, okay, questions will follow your you might break your objectives into sub objectives. Okay, and then formulate certain questions to answer these sub objectives. Okay, so these sub objectives or perhaps these questions will be simple restatements that are in operational form. So now you can operate on these questions to answer your sub objectives. Okay, so these sub objectives and research questions will actually tell you what will your research address. I'm repeating again, these research sub-objectives and questions that are mean to answer the sub-objectives will specify what your research will actually address. Okay, so questions can include what, where, which, or why, how. Okay, your questions can objectives can generally start with to do this, to develop a model, to quantify the outcome, to evaluate the algorithm. So these are your sub objectives. Now to answer each of these sub objectives, we'll formulate one research problem that can start with why, where, which, why, how. So once you answer these questions, you will be able to give a very satisfactory answers solution to each of these sub objectives. And overall, when you answer these sub objectives, you are going to answer your main objective or main research objective of your problem. Okay, so simple way the simplest way to set up a research problem is to break down your research problem into smaller questions. Okay, for example, my question is, are school exam results a true statement of intelligence? This is my main research question. Okay, now just observe how do I break this research question into smaller questions, right? Okay, so what I'm talking here in this slide is how do you break your research questions into smaller sub questions so that understanding the system as a whole becomes quite easy. Okay, and I'm trying to provide a relevant example. Are school exam results a true test of student intelligence is my question. So I break into 4 small sub questions. Okay, for example, what constitutes intelligence? I'm talking about intelligence in the question. So my question is, what is intelligence as per you, or what constitutes intelligence? Then my second question is, what ways of testing intelligence are there? What are the possible ways by you test intelligence? Okay. Third question, what sort of school exams are there and how they are marked? Okay. Fourth questions, how do school exam criteria match those of the criteria of other intelligence tests? Okay, so look at one. How do I break up one question into 4 sub questions? And probably these sub questions are more intriguing. They are more intense. They give you more insights. If and if you know the answer or able to find some solution to these questions, you will be able to clearly come up with a conclusion for this main question. Okay, so these are possible ways. I'm not saying that these are the only ways to break up your main research question, but these are possible ways. You can add more and more sub questions if you think those are relevant to answering the main research question. Okay, so based on research questions, okay, how do you answer research questions? So research sub questions. So you for example, uh, let's say the question says which criteria of exams is which criteria of school exam is better. Okay, now here you have to take a decision, right? So you can formulate a hypothesis. Okay, for example, school exam results are a true test, school exam results are not a true test. Okay, and from the data that you have from schools, you formulate the null hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis, and then use a statistical test to prove or disprove the null hypothesis. Okay, probably when you prove or disprove, one of your questions will be answered, and hence it will ultimately add up to answering the main research question. So this is one way to solve one of these research problems. You can use models, you can use algorithms, but yes, definitely data are required to answer any of those questions. Given that either your problem is qualitative or your problem is quantitative. Okay, and with data, you have to work with statistical tools and algorithms. Hypothesis testing is one such very good tool to prove or disprove something, and by proving or disproving something, you will be able to answer one of your research question, and similarly answering one by one all your questions will answer your main research question. Okay. Now, what are the research questions that are related to research objective? Because we moved from objective, right, to sub-objective, and from sub-objective we moved on to research questions. Okay, so now I am talking about these research questions. Okay, how are they related to research objective? These are sub-objective. This is my research objective. So how are these research questions related to objective or sub-objective? Okay, one way to organize your research, is to list them. Okay, list them as sub-list under each research objective. So you have one objective. Okay, write your question. Then you have another research objective. Write your question. So this is my objective. This is my question. This is my objective, and this is my question, and so on. This shows which questions, if answered, will meet each objective. Now you can have a time frame to answer this part. So let's say 3 months. So when you spend 3 months and are able to provide an answer to this question, you have solved this objective. Next 3 months, next quarter, you spend working on this problem. So when you get an answer to this problem, you solve your second objective. Okay, this is what is being emphasized here. Which questions, if answered, will meet each objective. Okay, finally, objectives are declarative sentences, whereas questions are integrative sentences. So objective are declaration. You are declaring something in objective, as I told here. Okay, whereas questions are integrative. You are putting questions which make you to think, which make you to analyze, which make you to work on certain problems to give solutions. So to prove these declarative sentences, prove or disprove, okay, we formulate questions which need statistical tool techniques, etc., to be solved. Okay, I am not able to answer the questions on the way. First, let me complete so that then we can spend some time on questions. So we started with research problem, literature review, research objective, sub-objective, research questions. Okay, now your questions are ready. Okay, now we need to dive deep into the ocean. So we need data. So data, you will now play with data, and we need methodology to work on the data. Okay, so data can be collected in different ways, including surveys, interviews, questionnaire, observation, archival research, or public data. Okay, open public data. So you can download data or collect it from different sources online, physically, etc. Okay, and then you have to decide what is the sampling procedure you will adopt to collect these data sets. Okay, so the sampling procedure should be able to provide a rationale for subject selection, okay, and sampling procedure. So the way you design your sampling strategy, that tells us, or that gives us some clue why on what is the rationale based on which you have designed such a procedure. Okay, so procedure can change depending upon what type of approach you use to collect data, whether you want to download a data or collect it from surveys or interviews or questionnaires, etc. Okay, now before we look into methods, let us understand what is the difference between methodology and method. Many people confuse, and they say that both are same, right? So a research methodology philosophy is the philosophy or general principle which will help you to perform the research. So research methodology is a philosophy, okay, or it is a general principle which guides the research. Whereas methods are tools. Methods are tools. Methods are tools which will help you to analyze the data. Methods are tools that will help you to analyze the data. Okay. So I have put a comparison table. Maybe whenever at the end of the lecture, you can go through that. So I have compared here the research method and the research methodology. Okay, what is the difference? The basis of the comparison are their meaning. What is it? What it encompasses? What it comprises of? And what is the objective? Okay, so for example, the objective of research method is to discover solution to a research problem, whereas the objective of methodology is to apply correct procedures so as to determine solutions. Okay, so methodology deals with procedures, method deals with solution. Discover solution using tools. Okay, so you may go through this depending on keeping in mind different bases of comparison. How are these two different? So we are more interested in defining in developing methods for solving a problem. Okay, so methods means tools. So when we work on algorithms, when we work on developing a model, so these are all examples of methods that help us to come up with solution to a given problem. Whether the procedure but what we have adopted is correct or not will be defined by methodology. Okay, so methods section in your research problem will answer two main questions: how were the data collected and generated? How were the data analyzed? So generally the data and method sections are combined because you will be dealing with tools and techniques to handle the collected data. Okay, method should have a clear connection with research problem. So we should know what data we are collecting and what method we are choosing. Okay, so what it means is that method should actually address the problem. Method should actually address the problem. Okay, one of the very common deficiency that we see is that in research articles, what deficiency we see is that in research articles, the proposed method is unsuited to achieve the stated objective because you do not select the right tool, right way, right method to achieve the objective that you have stated. Okay. uh, Okay, so how do you come up with different methods? those methods can be looked from or found from handbooks, from review articles in journals, or reviewing book chapters from technical manuals. So these are the ways to get the method. Sorry, sorry, not able to hear you.
How long will it take?
I need 15 minutes more.
Can you make it 10 maximum?
Okay,
10?
okay.
Some few questions are there. That's why.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I will. Okay. So, okay. So, how do you get information on on the methods? You handbooks, review articles, journals, technical manuals, etc. And there are many ways of trying to find the right method and what is the description and their use. Okay, we must know what is the use of those methods that we are talking about. Okay, I have seen many times, and 99% of people do a mistake. So if somebody knows a method, okay, I have seen many times, observed many times that people tend to fit the research problem to the method. Okay, people tend to fit the research problem to the method, which is actually wrong. Okay, research problem is independent of method. A method should be suitable for a research problem, but a research problem should not be suitable to a method. Research problem as such is independent, right? Methods are tools. So given A, B, C, D, E, F methods, we need to select one of them, okay, that can help you to solve the research problem. So please do not fit your research problem to the method, but select the right method that can solve your research problem. Okay, because methods are tools to analyze the data. Okay, so coming to data analysis. So data analysis is a separate topic that comes in the data science. Probably we may not be able to spend more time on this. So it may be a statistical analysis, okay, to prove or disprove certain theories. So you may go through the slide material once after the presentation. Okay, so data analysis describe the strategies and measures that are taken to ensure that the research is reliable, valid, so that when somebody else replicates the research, okay, they should be able to get similar results. Based within the data analysis, inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning are two important concepts. So in inductive reasoning, research starts from specific observations or experience, okay, that develops to a general conclusion. Okay, example, all the giraffes that I have seen, repeated observations, have very long necks. Okay, therefore, I conclude that all giraffes have long necks. This is my conclusion. What is the disadvantage of this observation? We don't know how many observations were made. All giraffes I have seen, but how many repeated observations? This is not clear, right? Under which conditions should the observation be made so that the true conclusion can be reached? Now, what was the condition under which this repeated observation has been done is not clear, right? So these are the disadvantages of inductive reasoning, where we start from specific observation or experience and then derive a conclusion. In deductive reasoning, we begin with a general statement, okay, and through logical argument, we come to a conclusion. For example, all living things breathe. This is the general statement, first premise. So now humans are living things, inference, second premise, and therefore humans will breathe. This is the conclusion. What are the disadvantages here? This is more of a trial and error method. Okay, hypothesis is falsifiable and it may lead to total rejection of theory. Okay, and one may have to require a new start. Okay, truth of the conclusion depends very much on the truth of your premise that you have seen here. Okay, so this is the process of deduction. Okay, and in deductive approach and inductive approach, from theory to observation, and this one is from observation to theory. Okay. Now I will spend few minutes on research and scientific method. So to do science is to follow prescribed methods at a prescribed method to arrive at a knowledge, right? So this scientific method is a manner, is a way of thinking and working towards more complete knowledge. Okay, that can include building the world or building the system. So it is not believing a system, but it's building a system or system in the world or humans in the world. Okay, so these scientific methods have been proved successful in explaining the world as we observe it through models. Explanations continue to improve. Okay, explain more in more detail. Okay, predict what can be the further observations. Example, new observation, new location, repeat observations, effect of intervention. Okay, and engineering, that is building things that work. So in all these aspects, scientific methods have proved to be successful. Go through this flow chart. It is quite easy to understand, and it basically summarizes the points that I have explained in the few slides earlier. Okay, and also request you to go through this slide. This slide will actually summarize the entire discussion what we have been doing till now. Okay, we start our work with review. Okay, and then how to disseminate your information once you have published your results. Okay, so this deals with all your data collection, analysis, etc. Okay, what is a good research? A good research is systematic. It means that research is structured with specified steps to be taken in a sequence. Okay, good research is also logical. It means that research is guided by the rules of logical reasoning. Okay, and these logical reasoning could be process of induction or deduction that we saw earlier. Okay, and these are really useful in doing good research. So it should be systematic, it should be logical, it should be interesting. This is very important, or else you will lose interest in maybe in a few months and then would not like to come back to the same work again. Data availability is important. Okay, we must ensure that the topic that we have selected, data can be collected on those topics. How significant is the problem? Okay, it should contribute towards improvement and understanding of the theory. Okay, adequate. The topic must be in accordance to the skill of the researcher. This is not always true, because you can always spend a week to a month in trying to learn a new topic and then trying to use it for your research. Okay, and but definitely availability of resource and time restrictions are important. And then ethical issues, we should not uh, work on a topic that actually harms the society. Okay, apart from the above criteria, a good research is one which has clearly defined purpose. Okay, and finds a wider acceptance. Okay, and then research methods should be defined in a clear manner with sufficient detail, so that repetitions of the study can be done in future, and any limitations and assumptions made by the researcher during the experiment should be clearly highlighted and marked in the research. Okay, research design should be well planned. Okay, and then there should be sufficient data to investigate the research topic, or else biasness of the data will lead to inconclusive results. Researchers should confine the conclusion to those justified by the data. Okay, we cannot make a general statement just by looking at a small sample of data. Therefore, we must confine our conclusion to those justified by the data. Finally, good research depends on great deal of integrity and commitment and hard work of the researcher. Okay, so what are the challenges? Challenges are that we spend a lot of time in trying to capture the data which has already been captured by other agencies or organizations. So particularly data sharing is not something which we see very often. Okay, lot of data and experiments are repetitive. So today I have done that, and tomorrow you may repeat the same experiment, because I am not sharing my results with you or data with you. So this leads to redundant storage, redundant computing, etc. Moving data sets from one source to other source is difficult and time consuming. So maybe we have a central repository, but to download the entire data sets is not that easy. So, and then every day some one of the researchers will download the same data. Because we do not share the data, we keep on downloading the same data again and again, which is expensive and time consuming. And people, this has slightly improved these days, because people have now started sharing their programming codes, results through GitHub, etc. But until some time back, it was not feasible, and even it's not completely a practice that sharing codes and intermediate results. Still, people try to hide their codes and not distribute to the common people. I should not put too much emphasis on this, because things are improving, but still there is a lack of infrastructure in our country. Okay, these are some problems that we encounter. Things are improving day by day, year by year, but still more thrust has to be given. We do not have too many scientific trained people. Interaction between academia, research, institution, and government agency is government institutions, industry, and agencies less. So until these all work together, we are not able to generate a lot of good research problems and research funding. Okay, data privacy and code of conduct still not taken care, but currently the government is working hard to look into data privacy issues and how to conduct research with ethics. There is a lot of overlapping research, because people keep on repeating the same research again and again without sharing the codes, data, results, etc. And many of us still do not have access to literatures and data, and we end up reading only few papers, because most of the journals papers are subscribed, require subscription, which are highly paid. So still access to open access literature is not feasible as of now. Not feasible for most journals, and some of the data sets are not easy to obtain because they are not in the public domain. So as an illustration, you first select a case, okay, then build a theoretical framework, okay, then collect the data, and then describe and analyze the case. So I'm just summarizing the entire thing what we have talked. Select a case, define your problem, build a framework, collect your data, and then analyze your data. Finally, yeah, just 5 minutes more. I'm about to finish. Okay, so I am trying to show you one journal paper published in IEEE Transactions on Geoscience and Remote Sensing, volume 43 in 2005, and it's a comparative paper. So I told some time back that there could be method A, B, C, D. Okay, so you might be comparing A, B, B, C, and A, D, all four together. Okay, so there is nothing new in this research. Okay, but at least you are able to comment that you are able to say that don't use A, B, C, D. These are not useful for a certain set of problems. Let's try and see if E and F can work. Okay, so even this kind of study is not waste, even though you did not succeed in developing a new technique, but you are able to know what are their limitations. And these kind of study leads to papers such as comparative analysis. And look at the journal; it's published in a very good journal. IEEE Transaction is supposed to be a very good journal, so it's not a waste of time when you are not able to generate new results. But it could definitely lead to a comparative analysis, and it can be published in nice, very good journals. Okay, so I have not shared the full paper here. But at the end of introduction, okay, the researcher is very well able to define the problem. Okay, see, by looking at the literature journal paper, so they found whatever they found, they have stated here, it was found that many of the existing methods, such as this cannot be accommodated within this concept. Therefore, the main objective of this paper is to propose a comprehensive framework. Look at the sentence here. Okay, so first they write the literature review, which I have not stated. Immediately after the abstract, there is a literature review. Based on the literature review, they have highlighted what is the gap. It was found that many of the existing methods such as A, B, C, D cannot be accommodated within this concept. Therefore, the objective of this paper is to propose the objective of this paper is to propose a new framework or a comprehensive framework to generalize image fusion techniques. So first we perform literature review, then we formulate the gaps, and then we formulate the research objective followed by the research problem. Finally, the last topic, which I will take 2 minutes. Once you have done your research, how do you write interesting papers? Okay, beautiful part of writing is that you don't have to get it right the first time, unlike say a surgeon. Okay, so it takes time, it takes a while when you have to keep on writing until you are able to improve it. As a general rule, to submit your paper in a very good journal, the key points are: you have to convince the reviewer, your audience means the reviewer, that the problem is interesting, it is hard, and you have solved it. Okay, so the question is, how should you communicate the research community and reviewer? How should you communicate this to the research community? So it is important to learn, and this takes a while, maybe years and couple of years, that when you become perfect in writing a paper or a research proposal for a grant proposal. Okay, and it is important to learn different aspects on how to write a good paper and communicate it effectively. Okay, so we must keep in mind these 3 aspects to convince the reviewer that the problem is interesting, it is hard, and you have solved it. Okay, so basically these are the steps that you follow in any research paper. You start with introduction, literature review, then what motivated you to work on this problem, the problem statement and objective, one or many, okay, followed by research question, then data sets and how did you collect the data, and data preparation, data pre-processing. Finally, experiment design methodology, algorithm, whatever you use, followed by results. Okay, and this is something very important: discussion limitations of the present study. You must discuss your results. Presenting your results is one part, but discussing your results is equally important. Okay, discussion means what insights did you get from the results, okay, and what are the limitations, and then finally conclude your result by mentioning what could be the future scope of your study. And definitely we must acknowledge all the agencies, the funding agency, the people who participated in the data analysis, data collection, etc., in writing the report. Okay, so these are a few references, and with this I would like to thank all of you for patiently listening me for almost I think close to 1.5 2 hours, close to 2 hours. So I would be sending this slide to Srinivas, and he would be distributing it to all of you. Thank you for joining me. Have a nice day. Bye. I am ready to take any questions if time permits.
Uttam sir.
Yes.
Uttam sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, thank you very much for your excellent lecture. So several questions are there, sir, but we are running out of time. So I will mail these things and you can reply it, sir.
Yes, definitely. Yes, 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 yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Once again, on behalf of all the participants and the
Yeah,
guests
sure.
here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, please share your presentation.
Yes, yes, yes. I will. Yeah, sure, sure.
I will circulate these things to you.
Thank you, Srinivas.
Thank
I
you,
will
sir.
log in. Yeah.
Yes. Sir. Oh, okay, I will make it. So what you have to lesson? Sir, 1 minute. 1 minute. So 1 minute, sir. I will get it. Please. Sir,
Hello, can you hear me?
yes, sir. Sir. Sir.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Sir.
Yes, tell me.
Sir, are you hearing me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Your video is not coming, sir.
Hang on, I'll just turn it on.
Ah.
Okay. Yeah.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir.
Not
I
a
will
problem.
just
Now,
introduce
how
you.
do I share my screen? Because I'm not
You
able to share.
will do that, sir. Okay. ಬರ್ತಿ 1 ನಿಮಿಷ ಕರೆಯೋಣ ಸರಿ 1 ನಿಮಿಷ ಬರಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ 5 ನಿಮಿಷ
Sorry, I've got it now.
You got it now, sir?
Yeah, I've got it. Let me just show you if I can show you my presentation. Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir. It's coming. I will introduce you, sir.
Okay, fine. I'll just.
So, welcome to all the participants for the another distinguished talk on reviewing the literature and the research design. We are here with Dr. J. Asundi sir, is the Executive Director at the Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, which in short term in consist in Bangalore, India. It's a well-known research organization. Sir has been involved in research and development projects in multiple areas, and his current focus is on organizational development. His initial work was in the area of emergency and disaster management. Sir mentored teams across multiple areas spanning sanitation, urban development, energy, and climate. Sir is spearheaded the establishment of artificial intelligence for social impact as a sector of work and the creation of the Center for Air Pollution Studies at CSTeP. Sir, broader research interests lie in decision making and the development of decision support systems for a number of public policy problems. Dr. Asundi sir started his career as a software engineer at Infosys Technologies. Sir spent a year as a postdoc at the Software Engineering Institute, Pittsburgh, prior to becoming as assistant professor of information systems in the School of Management at the University of Texas, Dallas. Sir holds a BTech from IIT Bombay and MS and PhD degrees from Carnegie Mellon University, USA. Sir is a senior member of IIIE and is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. With this brief introduction about Professor Asundi sir, on behalf of CSTeP and all the participants and my own behalf, welcome you sir for giving a distinct lecture on literature survey and research design. Welcome you sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know it is a very odd hour to start this, but I think it will be a good thing to have before we get off to lunch. If I may, so if you may allow me. Research development, but I think we will spend a little more time on this particular aspect just so that we can understand. So please tell me if my screen is visible, right? Okay, so,
yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Yeah,
yes.
The presentation screen is available. Okay, fine. Just making sure that. Okay, so so just to quickly go through what I will talk about is first I will talk about the scientific method. So yes, you may have already done a lot of discussions on hypothesis, on research objectives and things like that. But I think it's good to understand where is this all coming from. What is the epistemological basis behind a scientific method? And so then you will be able to come up with a better hypothesis based on that. Second is I will talk about a little bit about how do you develop the hypothesis. And then finally, we can try and have a little bit of time for discussion. To be very honest with you, this presentation is not very good online because this kind of presentation actually requires a discussion, a back and forth between the instructor and the students. And it's actually a discussion. It's not so much about an instruction. So let's try this anyway, and we can see if we can get some time to start discussing some of these things and take it. So let's start with the question of what is science, right? Why do we feel science is so different? I mean, in our society, everyone talks about, oh, this is science, this is science. But what is so different from the other things, right? I mean, there are people who have very good opinions. There are people who come up with very good guesses. And then, of course, you have various people who can come up with various speculation. I mean, by and large, let us take some more practical examples. We all watch cricket. You know, cricket matches happen. And then you have these pundits who come and give opinions about who's batting will be very good, and then there'll of course be people who are guessing who will win the match. How is that different from science, and why is it different? Right. So and then this is something I assume that you already know, that you guys have already looked at and said that okay, there is a simple model of the scientific process, which you also saw in the previous lecture, that there is you state the problem, you form the hypotheses, right? You form the hypothesis, and then from hypotheses, I'm sorry, is this still visible? Yeah. You form the hypothesis, and then you observe an experiment. You observe the universe, or you observe your subject matter, and then you conduct certain experiments. You collect that data, you interpret the data, you draw the conclusions, and that's where you get your research paper. Now, the problem with, and so this is something that Francis Bacon, this is in 1561 to 1626, where he came up with this notion of a scientific process, right? That is, your experimentation should be guided by a prior hypothesis. That is, you have to have a hypothesis. Like you see, the hypothesis is step 1 and 2, and then your interpretation and collecting of data and everything is points 3 and 4. Now, so this brings us to the issue of a scientific method. And so this is where we have the notion of what we call induction, right? So induction is a form. So I think there was a discussion in the previous lecture where they talk about what is logic, right? And so the logic, one of it is induction, where you have a reasoning in which the conclusion, though supported by the premise, does not follow from them necessarily. Okay, so let me, are you able to hear me now? Okay. So the form or reasoning in which the conclusion, though supported by the premise, does not follow necessarily from it directly, the premise, and the process of estimating the validity of observations of part of a class of facts as evidence for a proposition about the whole class. So you're trying to talk about the whole thing. So what you're doing is when you're observing a very small fraction, right? Suppose if you want to find out something, right? You pull a coin from a bag and you find out it is a rupee coin. You remove another coin and you see it's also a rupee coin. You remove a third coin from the bag and you have a rupee coin. So now from this, you will try to make an assumption that you will try to estimate. You'll say, oh, all the coins in the bag are rupee coins. Right. So that is the way. Similarly, when you do the sampling, right, you do sampling of observations, you'll say that sample is representative of the full. And that is what the method of what we would call is induction. Now, what differentiates a scientific statement from a non-scientific one? Remember in the previous slide, we talked about what is the difference between opinions, guesses, and speculation, is that in scientific statements, they are, number one, quantifiable. Number two, they are verifiable. So let's start with the first point, right? Quantifiable means that I should be able to numerically assign a value to it, right? There's a way to quantify it, right? Either it is a count of something, or it's a fraction of something, or it is some frequency, right? It's a number, so that's quantifiable. The second thing is verifiable. That means, and the implicit statement here is it's independently verifiable. That means if I observe something, there can be an independent person that we can go in and actually verify, and the person will come to the same conclusion. So let's say we go to a park and we see two elephants, and you say, okay, I see two elephants, so that's quantifiable. Second is it verifiable? That means can somebody else see that and say, yes, it is indeed two elephants. Now the question becomes replicable. So when you're doing research, it should also be something that not only you can come to this conclusion, right? It is something where if anybody else also does the same steps as you did, they will get the same result, right? So that is an important part of scientific. And then finally, they should be defensive. That is, you should be able to defend that particular statement. So an important part about statements that belong in science must be reproducible observations, right? And this is a very important part. However, and this is how science probably worked through the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. And then in 1900, you have a philosopher by the name Karl Popper who came in, and around in the 1930s or 40s, he brought in this concept that, the also difference between a scientific and a non-scientific statement is the notion of falsifiability. And the reason is that any scientific statement is one that could possibly be proven wrong. That is, if you go into any statement, that is, you are able to prove that particular statement wrong. We'll get into a bit of examples now. So a falsifiable statement is one which always remains tentative and open to the possibility that it is wrong, right? So let us start with some examples of non-falsifiable statements. I think, yeah. Right? So let's say I say there is a monster living in the Bay of Bengal. Right? Now, is there a way to falsify this statement? Right? It's actually very difficult, because no matter what you do, and which is why, I don't know if you guys see stories, there always be this Loch Ness monster, right? And there is no way to falsify. So it's not a scientific statement, right? So there is a monster living in the state of Bengal. This is non-falsifiable. Or there are microorganisms on my palm that cannot be detected by any scientific equipment, right? So there's no way I can falsify this, right? Now, I would suggest that you think for a couple of minutes, and if any of you can think of other non-falsifiable statements. Okay, so let me give you another very, very easy example, is that you can have a statement, a falsifiable, non-falsifiable statement in the order of, well, the Earth rotation is actually a falsifiable statement. You can say that there is a way to, there is an experiment that I can conduct that can show that the Earth, if it was not rotating, would give me a different result than if the Earth is rotating, right? So that is an example of a falsifiable statement. So another example of a statement that is non-falsifiable is that you can say that next year I will be the happiest person alive, right? Because there's no way to falsify that. So these are examples of non-falsifiable statements. So now let's get into something that is what is in the realm of science, where we get into falsifiable statements, right? So let's start. The first one is, in Karnataka, it rained less than 100 centimeters in 2018, right? This is a falsifiable statement in the sense that I can go to the meteorological office and find out how much it rained in the year 2018 and test this assumption of whether it was less than 100 or more than 100. So if it is more than 100, I can say the statement is false. If it is less than 100, I can say, okay, yes, the statement is true. Similarly, I can say that there are no ducks swimming in Bellandur Lake in Bangalore, right? So now the question becomes, how do you falsify the statement? So there has to be, so a falsifiable statement is one that I can give you a method by which that statement can be falsified. Right, so let me just, can you repeat that? So you said that viruses will always exist. So I'm trying to think whether that falls under a quantifiable scientific statement. I mean, there is an essential truth to that. And I think there is a way to show, actually, that could be a falsifiable statement, because you can, in some ways, show that there is a method by which you can detect viruses, and you can say, if I don't find anything on this, So it is like saying, okay, there are no viruses on this particular surface, and you have a method to test viruses, and you can take a swab of that surface and show that there were no viruses in that. So the point is that in Popper, in this uh, uh, Karl Popper's basic, okay, every human being is bound to die. I'm just trying to, let me just see if I can open up the, no, I cannot do this. Where's that? I'm trying to see, how do I get out of this? I'm not able to see the comments made by people for too long. I don't know how I'm supposed to see that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that when you think of a scientific statement, there should be a way in which that can be falsified. That statement, you can think of a technique or a method for it to be falsified, right? And a great example of this is actually Einstein's theory of relativity, right? So Einstein's theory of relativity said something about large objects. It talked about gravity, and it took 75 years for them to show that his is indeed true, because based on his calculations, he said that you will be able to observe a particular star in a particular place, which will be moved by this much amount. And so there was a way to test that. So when the eclipse occurred, they looked at that eclipse and then they found a particular star which they thought would be in particular position. But because of the way light was bending, they were able to say, yes, indeed, that star's position is moved. And this is a sort of almost like saying that, yes, we are able to prove the theory of relativity based on that particular observation. So there was a way to falsify that particular observation. So another way to a falsifiable statement is, you can say, someone can say that the moon is made of cheese. How do you falsify that? You say, well, all we can do is we can fly over to the moon, take out a piece of it, and test whether that is indeed cheese or not, right? So that's an example of a falsifiable statement. So then we were talking about induction, right? There's another process or scientific method which we call deduction. And deduction is a process of reasoning in which the conclusion follows necessarily from the premise presented, so that the conclusion cannot be false if the premises are true, right? So that is, it's a process by which the conclusion is reached from the particular premise, right? So for example, if you say that all rectangles have 4 sides, then, and if you say all squares are rectangles, then the deduction is that all squares have 4 sides, right? So that is the process of deduction that you will arrive at a particular conclusion. So then there are other notions of scientific revolutions, and I think Thomas Kuhn is a very famous scientist who essentially talked about this notion of paradigms of scientific revolutions. And his notion of science was that there are sudden shifts in paradigm. That is, we had Newtonian mechanics, and then suddenly we came to realize there is general relativity, and so we moved over completely to that particular paradigm. And the paradigm or the mental model is what shapes the world and the way one observes looking at the world. And that is the primary notion, or that is the hypothesis that is put by Thomas Kuhn. Now, the perspective here is that depending on how you see it, what do you observe, right? So what do people see in this image, right? There are some people that will see a duck, right? There are people that will see a duck, and then there'll be some people that see a rabbit, right? Now the question is, what do you observe? And each researcher actually comes with their own sense of what they observe. And so suddenly what seemed to be very objective is no longer so objective, right? Because if you now remember, we talked about this notion of verifiability. I will come and say, I'm seeing a rabbit, you come and say, no, 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 this is not a rabbit, this is a duck. So how do you get into that? So this also drives a lot of the scientific studies, especially when you get into things that are very difficult to conform in many ways, right? Here's another example, right? So different people observe different things. Here's also another example, right? So how many, who sees what here, right? How many people see two faces looking at each other, right? And how many see a candlestick, right? Or a table or whatever. I mean, a structure, right? It's more like a candlestick. Who sees that? I mean, different people see different things. Some people see the faces looking at each other, and some people see the candle stand. So these are perspectives that different people observe when they are looking at the world. And so this brings us this notion of a gestalt, right? A gestalt is a notion of a unified whole. It's a configuration, a pattern, or organized field having specific properties that cannot be derived from the summation of its component parts. That is, suppose if I were to show you a small piece of something, let's go back to this, right? If I were to show you a small piece, let me see if I can use the pointer. Yes. Suppose if I use a small piece and I show you only this part, right? If I show you only this part, you will say, oh, that is a face. But then if I zoom out and I show you the whole, suddenly you see something different, right? You'll see a candlestick. You'll say, no, 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 that was not a face. That is, am I audible? Hello? Okay, yeah. So you will see the candlestick. So that is the essence of the gestalt. That is that you cannot derive the sum from the individual parts, right? A great other example of a gestalt is the notion of looking at small pieces and then realize, or looking at one piece of a gear and not knowing that this gear, when it's part of a larger pattern, that is, it could be a part of a car, it could be part of a motorcycle, and the property of that is very different from that of a single gear. You cannot say anything about the motorcycle as a whole by just looking at the gear itself. Right? That is the essence of the gestalt. So hence, let us go back to the scientific method. Based on what we know, the whole notion of deductions, inductions, things like that, let us go back to what we think is the modified scientific method that we can now look at. And so we start with a worldview, right? We have a worldview, we look at things, we observe things in the universe. So we have a worldview, and based on that worldview, we have what we would call an interpretation or a classification. Right, so we will have, okay, animal kingdom, plant kingdom, birds, mammals, all that entire classification that we talk about. In other fields also we have different classifications, but then we have a worldview. We start with the classification, and then based on initial observations, right, based on initial observations and our known classification, we will then it will lead to inductions. That is, we will be able to induce certain results based on the classification that I have and the initial observations that I have. Let's go back to that example of the sack containing rupee coins, right? Now, my worldview is that I know that there are coins in this bag, and I know all the coins in the bag are the same, right? So what do? I pick out one coin, which is my initial observation. I see it's a rupee coin. I say, okay, good. I remove one more coin, right? And I say, oh, it's another rupee coin. I remove a third coin. It's also a rupee coin. So I will have this induction where I will make this now a general statement of the world, right? I'll make a general statement of the world. Sorry. I'll make a general statement of the world that the bag contains 1 rupee coins, right? The bag contains 1 rupee coins. Now I can I can generate a testable statement about this. Now what I can do is I can say, okay, you know what? Let me start picking more coins out of the bag, which I would call follow-on observations. And based on that, I can feed that into my prior. That is the fact that I'd already picked out 3 coins. I picked out the prior, and then I looked at the induction, and I say, okay, yes, this bag indeed contains 1 rupee coins, right? So that is my testable statement of the world, and it started with that general worldview. Now, if my worldview was that the bag contains a random set of coins, right? Then my inductions would be very cagey, right? They would not be so definite in saying exactly. So the last few coins in the bag may not be so. But then I start with a worldview, right? So that means, suppose if I know the bag is about 1,000 coins, I can make a statement which is that this bag contains rupee coins with some, what would I say, confidence, right? I cannot say 100% sure, but I say 95% I am sure, because I picked coins by random. So statistically, I can pick a random sample from the bag and come up with an answer saying that, okay, the bag contains 1 rupee coins, and the bag contains 1 rupee coins, and it contains 1 rupee coins, and I can say with a certain confidence interval that this is indeed all 1 rupee coins. There is obviously, till I check all the coins, I cannot say for 100% sure that all the coins in the bag are 1 rupee coins, right? But if I had started with a general worldview that there are random coins in the bag, and even if I picked out 5 or 6 coins that were 1 rupee coins, it's quite possible, of course, again, now you get into the confidence interval, that I randomly picked up 5 coins, and the fact that all of them are 1 rupee coins, it does take me to a particular place in the confidence interval as to whether all coins in the bag are 1 rupee coins. So it all depends upon what my initial hypothesis or what my interpretation or classification is to begin with. So this is sort of what we would call the modern scientific method. I know some of you must have done Bayes' rule and things like that, but these are examples of how the modern scientific method has actually progressed. Let's see. So this is where we get to the notion of some of the methods that are included for research formulation are, right. So what we do is we say, where does the problem origination or discovery begin? How do you even start your research, right? I mean, what is driving a particular, I mean, you want to know more about the world, and you have a method to do that. And the question becomes, where do you get that research formulation, right? Where does the problem origination or discovery begin? Now, in many cases, it starts with what we would call previous experience. That is, people who have, you will go and work with somebody, and that person has already done some research in an area. And so now you will join with them, and they will say, oh, well, I know A, B, and C, but I don't know D, E, and F. So maybe we can do some research to examine D, E, and F. So that is number one. The second way could be basically triggered interest, right? You are out in the world. I don't know if any of you have read the story of Dr. C.V. Raman, and he was traveling somewhere, and he noticed how light was diffracting, and that triggered his interest into studying light, and hence out of that came the Raman effect, right? So it could be, so there was no previous experience there, but it came out of a triggered interest. Similarly, there are lots of things happening in the world today where the interest gets triggered by either observations or a worldview, or of seeing things in a slightly different way, right? Then you can also have what we call potential problem fields, right? That is, in certain fields, you see these as potential problems coming up in the future. That is, suppose if you need to understand various things about the universe, that is, suppose, let's say you have an example of, that you are burning fossil fuels, you're going to create a lot of carbon dioxide. So then the question becomes, okay, wait, what is going to happen if we keep doing this? What happens if the atmospheric carbon dioxide percentage starts increasing. So this is where you get the notion of coming up with the problem, saying that, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you keep building upon each other. So there is, of course, some amount of previous experience, but also there is a potential problem in certain fields, right? So this is where you have the criteria of problems, and then you have what we would call a problem statement. You will come up with a problem statement. Then you, of course, search, gather, explore the evidence to try to answer your problem statement. And then you can generate, generate creative and logical alternate solutions to that. And this is where you get into what we would call the making of the educated guess, right? You set up your hypothesis based on those basic understanding that you have of the problem statement, because you can't jump to hypothesis too soon, because the hypothesis has to be meaningful. It can't be just a hypothesis that, you know, everyone will say, oh, well, that is obvious. There's nothing great about that hypothesis. You also need to have hypothesis that people will say, you know what, I do not know the truth a priori, and so hence I need to be able to understand or test this hypothesis, and it could be equally likely that I accept or reject the hypothesis. Okay. So what is the hypothesis? So the hypothesis is a clear statement of what is intended to be investigated, right? And it is important that it should be specified before research is conducted and should be openly stated in reporting the results, right? So this is a very important part. That is, you need to have a clear statement of what you intend to investigate. It should be specified before research, and it should be stated when you're reporting the results. So this allows us to identify, one, what is the research objective. So you can have a research objective and you can have multiple hypotheses, right? That is there. Then you have key abstract concepts that are going to be involved in that research, right? That also allows that. So when you're stating the hypothesis, it allows you to make sure the concepts involved in the research are very clear. And there is also the relationship to both the problem statement and the literature review, because your hypothesis, if it has already been established by a prior researcher, then you are just replicating the research, right? You're not doing new research. Replication is important, but you are just replicating somebody else's research, or you are verifying what they have discovered. So what should be the nature of the hypothesis? When you're setting up the hypothesis, what should be the nature of it? Number one, it should be something that can be tested, right? It's necessary that it can be tested. It needs to be verifiable or falsifiable, right? These are two things that the hypothesis is something that is, I should be able to verify. So let's say if I say that the number of students in the class are greater than 50, I should be able to verify it. And I know there is, my hypothesis is that the number of students class are greater than 50. So there is a falsifiable. That is, if it was less than 50, then I know that that statement can be falsified. So there has to be a way in which a particular statement can be falsified. Then the question becomes, it should also be able to predict certain consequences, right? The prediction of the hypothesis should be also something that can predict the consequences of a particular action, right? So then you also have to keep in mind that the hypothesis should be something that it is considered valuable even if it is proven false. That is, if you cannot reject, that is, even if that hypothesis is proven false, there should be some value to that particular hypothesis. It should not be a moral or ethical question, right? It should not be a moral ethical question. And you also have to keep in mind that it's neither too specific or too general. And this is where having good advisors will really help you in terms of setting or creating your ideal hypothesis. Okay? So an example is, let's try this, right? So let's say you are observing animals, like you're a biologist, you're observing animals and their behavior, right? Let's say you're observing it in a zoo. So let us look at examples of correct and incorrect hypotheses. Let me see. So let us see. Let me see. Can somebody? Where do we have here? Verifiable. Right. So can we have some examples of what are correct and incorrect examples, hypotheses? Let me see if I can pull up. Yeah. Yes, animals are a living being. That is something. It's not a hypothesis. You're not making any. Let's see whether that can be a correct hypothesis. I mean, I think that is the notion of what is living is already an axiom. So I don't think you're adding anything more to this, right? It needs to be something that can be tested. The animals are living. So, right. So animals can adapt to any habit. Let's see if I can pull this up. I have a bit of a problem. Let me just do one thing. Right. So these are all. So all the statements that you are making are very general, right? We are not being able to say anything. So let us take an example. Let me see. You know, I had an example in a place. Let me see if I can just pull it up. Give me 2 seconds. I will be able to pull it up quickly. Let me just see if I had a list of examples here. So I think here the important thing is that, see, when you're observing animals and behavior. So let's say you were to offer in a zoo, you were to offer bananas to 2 monkeys, right? And you offer these bananas to monkeys, and then you ask them to do a particular task. And so the hypothesis could be, an example of an hypothesis could be that that monkeys like bananas, right? Monkeys like bananas because you've been giving them bananas, they're eating it quite happily. So the reason it's an incorrect hypothesis is that you have not observed, or your test has not included other fruits, right? You've only given bananas, and so hence you are only going to see them eating bananas. You have not been able to test whether, if you give them bananas and grapes, whether they will be able to prefer one over the other, right? And so that is an example of an incorrect hypothesis. But if you provide both of these items, and then you can say, but then also you cannot say that the monkey prefers a grape over all fruits. All you can say, between bananas and grapes, monkeys prefer grapes, right? And what you can do is, that can be the hypothesis, and then you set around and conduct your experiment. So that is an example of correct and incorrect hypothesis. Is you have to be very careful in terms of what is it that you're testing and what is it that you are looking at. You can also say that notions of God-fearing, or I think these are not good hypotheses, right? Because these are moral and ethical questions. It all depends upon the framing of that. Suppose you were examining a society, you can say, oh, that's a God-fearing society. I think that is a moral or ethical question which does not fall, which is not a good hypothesis. So what are the hypothesis types? So there are 2 hypotheses. There is the null hypothesis, which is H0 or Hn. In many texts they put that. And then there is what we would call a alternative hypothesis, H1 or Ha. And the notion of the the null hypothesis is essentially an unproven statement which is believed to be true and is used as a basis for your argument, right? So to determine if a proposition is to be rejected or not in favor of an alternative hypothesis, right? That is the null hypothesis. The other example of a null hypothesis, it represents a theory that has to be put forward either because it is to be believed to be true or because it is to be used as a basis for an argument, but has not been proved yet, right? So here are examples of null hypothesis, right? An example could be a 2% increase in GDP will not adversely affect the atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? So you can either accept based on observations, you can accept or reject such a hypothesis, right? You can say that, okay, I will examine this. I will look at places where a 2% increase in GDP has occurred, and I will look at whether it has adversely affected the atmospheric CO2, right? And so there is a way in which it can be measured, quantifiable, it can be verified, and it can also be tested, and there is a way for it to be falsified also, right? So the alternative hypothesis is actually, it is a statement of what the experiment is trying to set up. So what you're really trying to set up is this alternate hypothesis. So you have to be treated as, so the alternative hypothesis is opposite of the null hypothesis. You always create a null hypothesis that you want to be rejected, right? So that is, you want to, let's say you want to test whether there are, the null hypothesis is that there are less than 50 students in this class. And so what I will do is, what I really want to show is that there are actually more than 50 students in this class. So my null hypothesis is that there are less than 50 students in this class. What I will do is then I will test by measuring or counting the number of students. And the moment I cross 50, I can say, oh, well, the null hypothesis, which is the number of students in this class is less than 50, is rejected. Hence, the alternative hypothesis is that there are more than 50 students in this class, right? So in some ways, you want to consider the actual desire, the alternative hypothesis is really the actual desired conclusion of your experiment, right? So you set the experiment up in such a way that you can reject the null hypothesis and hence accept the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so this is another example, right? So to test the mean GPA of students in college, whether it is different from 2.0 out of 4, right? So what is the null hypothesis? The null hypothesis is that the mean GPA of students in college is equal to 2.0. The alternative hypothesis is the mean is not equal to 2.0. So I have to show that the mean is either less than 2 or greater than 2. As long as either of them happens, then I know that it is different from 2. Another example is you are testing a new drug on its effectiveness to cure an illness, right? So this is a very live example, right? We are all constantly reading about different cures for COVID-19, right? And so let us say you are testing a new drug on this particular effectiveness. So the first question is, what will you test, right? What will you test? What is the null hypothesis? And what is the alternative hypothesis, right? So in this particular example, the null hypothesis, right, relates to the statement being tested, right? So whereas the alternative hypothesis relates to the statement being accepted if and when the null is rejected, right? So in the example of drug testing, you will have multiple hypotheses, but one of the first hypotheses you will try to put in place is that due to the introduction of this drug, there is a significant reduction, right? Reduction in some parameter, right? You will define a parameter. There is a reduction in this parameter, in certain sets of patients, right? So now that is the hypothesis. So I want to make sure that this drug is effective. So what I will do is I will set the null hypothesis to state that this drug, right, that this drug has no effect on the, no positive effect on the test patients, right? That is my null hypothesis. Then what I do is I will provide the drug to those particular patients. And then if I show that indeed there is a positive effect, then I will be able to reject the null hypothesis. I'll be able to reject the null hypothesis that there was no effect, right? And so hence I can show that there is effectiveness. And that is the first test of this drug. The second one will also be on safety. That is, people will test whether there was any adverse effect, right? So the null hypothesis there would be that there is an adverse effect of this drug on the test patients, right? If I can show that there was indeed, I can reject that null hypothesis, then I can say, yes, this drug does not have a bad effect on patients. So that is the example that we can use in the null hypothesis. So there are different ways in which you will phrase your null hypothesis. You do it such that you can reject it so that you can accept the alternative hypothesis. So coming back to the same thing again. So when you're testing the hypothesis, the null hypothesis relates to the statement being tested, whereas the alternative hypothesis relates to the statement being accepted if the null hypothesis is rejected. So we either reject H0 in favor of H1, or we do not reject H0. We never conclude that you can reject H1 or even accept H1, right? You will say we reject null hypothesis in favor of H1. That is the way one would do it. So if we conclude that you cannot reject H0, so let's say we gave this drug to the patients and we found that there was actually no effect, that we could not reject the H0, the null hypothesis, then it does not mean that the null hypothesis is true either, right? That there is no effect. It just means that there is no sufficient evidence against the null hypothesis in favor of H1. So this will also mean that rejecting the null hypothesis then suggests that the alternative hypothesis may be true. It does not prove that it is true. It just says that this hypothesis may be true. So this brings us to the point that when you reject the null hypothesis, you know for sure that the null hypothesis is false. What is true is a conjecture again. Unless you reject all the null hypotheses possible to accept H1, you will not be able to say that H1 is proved. All you can say is that H1 may be true. Right? So this is I think this is where we get to the end of this whole perspective on scientific inquiry, the notion of falsifiability, and the notion of testing of hypothesis, right? Because when you set up your hypothesis, you need to make sure that the hypothesis is something that can be rejected or not rejected. It cannot be something that there is no other answer, right? How would you prove something that is not true? So I think that is an important part of the setting of the hypothesis. Maybe if I can, let me see if we can take some questions now, if there are any questions, and we can take a few questions before we go through the last part of the slides, which is more on the notion of research methods and coming up with a literature survey and things like that. So are there any questions that I can see now? How do I see these questions? Okay, if I click on Q&A, I see this. Okay, let me see. Is there a way for me to look at the questions? I'm not able to see the questions.
Sir.
Yes, tell me.
Actually, they're not asking questions.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, they're not asking some questions. Somebody
Okay.
asked perception of slide. Somebody asking to explain it.
Okay. So if we want, so I think one thing we can do then is that if there are any questions, please send it to KSTA and they will relay to me, and then I can prepare the answer. I can prepare the answers to these questions, and then it can be posted to all the students. Is that okay, Srinivas?
Yes, sir. We will do it, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Then we can do that. If there are any questions, please write it down and send it to KSTA, and then we can take it from there.
Sir, somebody is telling about, say something about MICO.
Hang on, let me see. Okay, now I can see the chat. Sorry, now sorry, it was on the side. I was not able to open that. Okay, let me see.
Got it, sir?
Okay, so is the null hypothesis always a negative statement, right? So it need not always be a negative statement, right? It could be a positive statement that can be rejected, right? So for example, is that the null hypothesis is that that the I'm trying to think now. There are different ways to think about it, so it need not always be a negative statement, right? There it is. So in scientific research, it is absolutely compulsory. There is no. The question is it compulsory to have a hypothesis in scientific research? I think it is absolutely compulsory. It is not scientific research if you do not have a hypothesis or you do not have a notion of proof, right? The statement, there has to be a statement. In many cases, it's fairly implied, but there is always a hypothesis. Right, so here's another example of a possible hypothesis, right? Convalescent plasma therapy is effective for COVID-19 treatment over HCQS drug. So what you will have to set up an experiment, right, where you have a randomly distributed set of people, patients, right, who will, one set will undergo convalescent plasma therapy, others will go through the HCQS drug, and then we'll also have a third group, which is what we would call the placebo group, which is not given any drug. And we'll have to show statistically that the convalescent plasma therapy does better than all the other two, right? Only then you will say that I reject the null hypothesis that HCQS is better than convalescent or doing nothing is better than convalescent. That's about what you can say. You cannot say convalescent plasma therapy is the most effective. All you can say it is better than doing nothing, right? That is what you can state from the statement. Okay, so I think if you have any other questions, I would suggest that you send it to KSTA. We can take it from there, and we can move forward in that. Okay. So this brings us to the notion of what are research methods. Now, research methods, while we did talk about quantitative, you do also have what are called qualitative research methods. And these research methods are on the lines of content analysis. They can be descriptive. They could also be literature compilation. I think in the previous talk, somebody did put forward a research paper, which was basically examining various other papers and coming up with a literature review. That is an example of a literature compilation. Now, under quantitative research, you also have the correlational, you have quasi-experimental or causal comparative, and then you have experimental, where you actually have models, you experiment, and then you test the models. It's important that the choosing of your research method is really contingent upon the research design, right? For the control of variables. And I think there was a discussion in the last class also. That is, you don't take the method first and then decide on the research question, right? You do the research method comes after deciding on the research design and the research question in mind, right? So that is the primary aspect here. So coming back to the modified scientific method, we had the worldview, we have the interpretation. You have your interpretations, you have your initial observations, you have induction. Induction will then make general statements about the world. From that, we come up with specific testable statements about the world, which is what we would call the hypothesis. You then go around doing follow-on observations, and then you can make inductions, and then you can make general statements of the world. And that is the essence of what that is. And of course, these general statements of the world will fit into your worldview, right? Will fit into your worldview going over time, right? So let's say you did some studies in the past, that is now going to become part of your worldview because it will color the way you look at your initial observations, because of your interpretations will be different. So let us look at a simple example of a simple association between two variables, right? You have y and x. And let's say in the first statement, you can say y and x are associated, or there is an association between y and x, right? Now, this is just a simple statement of the association, right, between y and x, right? It's a simple statement of association between y and x, and there is nothing indicated about the association that would allow the researcher to determine which variable y or x would tend to cause the other variable to change in value, right? So this is, you're just saying that variables x and y are associated, and that is all that it's saying. You're not able to say more than that, right? So your example hypothesis here would be that y is related to x, or y is dependent on x, right? You know y and x are associated, but then you will say, you know what, I need to test this hypothesis. I will say y is related to x or y is dependent on x. Now, this hypothesis is a simple statement of association between y and x, but this time it may be inferred that the values of y are in some ways contingent upon the condition of x variable, right? You will say that y is dependent on x, and so you're saying that when x changes, y will also change, right? So here, that was this is a, so this hypothesis is far more informative than the previous hypothesis that we looked at. Another example of hypothesis could be is that as x increases, y decreases or increases, right, in value, or increases in value of x appear to have a reduction in values of y. So this is another example of a hypothesis. So here, what this hypothesis is really saying is that this is the most specific, right? It says that not only does it say that y and x are related, but it is also saying that y is dependent on x for its value, and it also reveals something more about the nature of the association of the two variables. It will say that here, as x increases, y decreases, and as x increases, y decreases. Right. So this is more specific of the three hypotheses that we talked about. So this is where we get into the notion of how do you test hypothesis. So you start with the stating of your hypothesis. You have your null hypothesis. You have your alternative hypothesis. Then you set the criteria for the decision, right? If you say that, so let's say, for example, you are saying that the students in this class have a GPA that is different than 2.0, right? So now you need to set the criteria, right? The criteria should be that what if I get my answer to be 1.99999? Do I reject the hypothesis because it is 1.999, or if it is 2.00001, right? So the question becomes, can those be also considered as 2, right? So this is where you get into that whole notion of statistical acceptance. So you need to set that criteria up front. You will say that, okay, if it is below 1.95 or below 2.05, then I will reject the null hypothesis of that the GPA of students, average GPA of students in this class is 2.0, right? Then you will go about collecting the data, and then finally you have a method to evaluate your null hypothesis. You have a statistical method that you can use. You can say, okay, I will use this particular test, and then you will evaluate the null hypothesis. So in hypothesis testing, you get what are errors. You can get errors, right? There are two types of errors that are possible while you're testing your hypothesis. So you can start with a prediction, right? You can start with a prediction that whether you will get A, the value, and if the prediction in the actual, suppose if the actual value is indeed A, then you will get your hypothesis will say that yes, it was actually A, I predicted A, so I have got it right. There's no problem. But what if it was actually A, but my prediction was that it is not A? So let us take, for example, right? You're going for testing of your COVID-19, right? Let's say you actually have COVID-19. The test comes out saying that you've got COVID-19. Then okay, fine, it is right. But what if you have COVID-19 and the test comes out saying that no, you do not have COVID-19, right? So now the question becomes that is wrong, right? Because the test has given you a wrong result, and that is what we would call that it is a type 1 error. That is, you have incorrectly rejected the null hypothesis, right? You've incorrectly rejected the null hypothesis. Similarly, on the other side, suppose if you do not have COVID-19, but your prediction, your test says that you have got COVID-19. This is where it is again wrong, and this is what we would call a type 2 error, where you have wrongly not rejected the null hypothesis. That is, that you do not have COVID-19. If the prediction is that you've not got COVID-19, then it's fine, and that is right. That's no problem, right? So they are the two types of errors in hypothesis testing, where type 1 is where you wrongly rejected the null hypothesis, and the type 2 is where you wrongly did not reject the null hypothesis. So this sort of ends the notion of hypothesis testing and how to go about doing the hypothesis testing. So now this brings us to what we would call literature survey, right? When everyone says, oh, you must do a very good literature survey. So if one were to ask, what is the purpose of literature survey, right? What do most people feel is the purpose of literature survey? Right. So one answer is to find a gap in what we know. Yes, that is definitely one. What are the other reasons for research gap is normally the one. What are the other ones? There are some other ones also. To find current status, yes, absolutely. That is also a good reason to conduct research. Sometimes to justify why we are studying what we are studying. That's right. To also create clear problem statements, absolutely. So literature survey, then to identify and formulate research problems, yes, that's definitely. And to gain more knowledge, to know the state of the world. Remember, the Gestalt or the state of the world is also there, right? We also need to have a worldview, so that is also a reason to that. So what are the big pitfalls of literature survey too, right? You can also have pitfalls to the survey. Just a second. Right. So the one thing that I forgot to mention is that in the purpose, if I were to look at the purpose for yes, absolutely. So the question is, should we do literature survey before framing the hypothesis? How do you know that the hypothesis that you are framing is reasonable or not, or somebody has not already done that study, right? So in fact, the purpose of literature survey, one of it is to establish your baseline research questions, which is what all the things that you talked about earlier. And the second one is to also avoid duplication, right? you do not want to duplicate what somebody also has done. And that is the big purpose of literature survey. You cannot go and say that, okay, you know what, I went and rediscovered Darwin's theory, right? I mean, people will say, well, that's very good, but what is the this thing? Just to, I think there's also a question on the previous thing on hypothesis testing, that which error is more severe, type 1 or type 2. I think the question also depends on what you are trying to, what is the, it depends upon the research, right? If, let's say, you're testing a drug and there a type 2 error where your misclassification can be sometimes more severe than the otherwise. That is, suppose if you diagnose somebody having a particular disease, you might end up giving them certain drugs that could affect them quite severely. That could be one. But in some cases, not diagnosing somebody could be just as bad, right? So it just depends upon the situation. I don't think there's a generic statement which will say that a type 1 or a type 2 error is more severe, right? You cannot say that. So this, coming back to literature survey, I think the purpose is to make sure that you have a good baseline of the research question, and number 2, you're not doing any replication. So, but what is the pitfall? The pitfall of literature survey is sometimes that it could give you a unidimensional perspective, right? It could give you a perspective that is only one-sided, right? Because nobody has actually studied an alternative way of looking at something, right? That could be a possible pitfall, right? So similarly, you could also end up with coming up with biased or incorrect hypotheses. That's another known pitfall of doing a literature survey. So hence, whenever you're in doubt, right, always revisit the purpose to make sure that you avoid the pitfall, right? Make sure you revisit your purpose and of what your research question is, so that you can avoid the pitfalls of that. I think if it is vast, that's good. There's no problem with that. It is your duty, especially if you are saying that you are going to be studying a particular area. It is important that you examine all the research that is there in that area. It is very important that you do that, irrespective of how large it is. The vastness of the research area sometimes you can take advantage of summary papers, right? The research review papers that people have written to help understand what is there in the research. The perspective is that you want to make sure that you get all sides of the view and you're not getting only a unidimensional perspective. So what are good places to start for research? So I think I've already given the answer to this. Can anyone tell me what are good places to start? I think reading research articles definitely, but what type of research articles, right? What type of journals? What type of articles, right? So what are the types of journal articles and papers that you would want to start with? I mean, in most cases, you would have already read the books, right? Books also contain a lot of places, right? You do cite books also. I think a good example, a good place to start actually is what I would call review papers, right? Papers which give a general review of all places. Basically, they have given you a sense of what the field is like. They also give you a sense of what are the good open problems in that particular area. So review papers, commentary pieces are really good places to start your literature survey. Look for those when you are starting. Otherwise, it is like a forest. You don't know where to start. Usually, if you have a map, which is what review papers typically are, they will tell you, okay, this is what you need to study or look at. Now, what is the next? So how should you present uh, these your literature survey? When you say you're doing a literature survey, what is it that you're really doing? Uh, uh, so I think a question for me is, could you suggest some journals for review papers? I think, to be very honest with you, every journal should, in the areas, typically carry review papers every once in a while. If you're in, I mean, nature and science are great places to start. Also, of course, they will also sometimes review papers that have happened, or review papers that have happened elsewhere. But in every journal, every once in a while, the editors call upon senior researchers in the field to write these review papers. So what they will do is they will review the broad field as a whole and try to give new researchers a sense of how a particular field has progressed in terms of the research hypotheses that different people set out to, and what is it that they discovered in that. So in every journal especially in your field, in all the journals, there will be some journals which will entertain these review papers. Typically, these review papers are also by invitation, so it's not something that you and I can normally write, but they also also do that. So the question is, how do you present it? I think it's very important that when you are presenting the research, uh, you have to make sure that the summary points uh, of that particular research paper or the author's arguments, uh, they are they form the building blocks of your literature survey. And as you progress, uh, if you're ever going to use a particular, so you read a paper and you say, yes, I want to cite this paper in my research, then you have to make sure that definitely you definitely use the gist of the author's arguments, because you need to make sure that the audience understands that you have correctly interpreted the results of the other paper. You cannot just say that as so and so. You need to make sure that you understand why that particular author's paper is important to your research question. And that is how it needs to be presented in your papers. In your papers, you need to make sure that when you are referring to some other paper, you have to say, okay, this is why I am referring to this paper. This paper said A, B, C, D, and I am going out here to show that C, D, E, or whatever is not indeed the case, or is indeed the case, right? Or it is what is driving my hypothesis to test something even further. They said this, I am going to test it with a far more specificity than otherwise. And that is the basic, I'm going to get more specific about a particular hypothesis based on that. And that is the optimal way to present research. It's very important that you have to convey to the reader, that you have indeed understood all the papers that you are citing and you have a good understanding. Now, it's possible that many a times a whole set of papers all speak to the same thing. In those cases, you'll just need to say, according to all these papers, this is what they suggest, and this is why it is important to my research question. So I think we have come pretty much to the end of my talk. So there are, I can talk about softwares for referencing. Of course, you have Mendeley, which is very good. A lot of people use that. But another software that I use quite a bit in my organization is called Zotero, Zotero. It is the same as Mendeley. The only difference between Zotero and Mendeley is that Zotero allows what we call a shared library. That means I can share my libraries with my colleagues, and they can then cite papers that I have added to the database. And it's very good if you're working in teams. If you're not working in teams, then there is no problem. You can use any of these software, even EndNotes, which is used in in Microsoft Word is pretty good, especially if you are working on your own. But by and large, I like Zotero a lot because it allows for, now all these systems are not, these systems are managing, allow you to manage your references. So what you do is, let's say you read a paper and then you add that to your Zotero library. So then it becomes part of your library, and then you can also put in notes, right? It allows you to put notes. And then when you are writing your paper, you can, Zotero has a plugin. You can say, okay, I want that paper. You click on it, and it will immediately cite it in that particular. So I will just post it here. I will send it to all attendees. It's called Zotero. Right, so there are plugins for Word as well as other tools. You can also produce BibTeX, so those who use LaTeX to write their papers can also import from Zotero, and it's a very easy way. Now, only if you form a group and you can, if you create a group, then all of them can have, you can have a shared library. So all of you can share a library. Some institutions can do that, and so you can access those shared libraries also in the process. So that is a good way to manage your references. By and large, I think it is important that you also write notes for each of the papers you read. The very important, because after 2 years or 3 years, you may not remember what that paper contained, and you need to write it in your own language, which is why the notion of having notes in your library, your citation library, is very important. It's very important, because then you can go there and quickly look through the notes and say, okay, yes, this paper said this or this paper said that, which is why you need to make notes that will be very useful for you later on, right? You have to think about it from that perspective. You should not think about it only from a narrow perspective of now, but also from a later on perspective. And sometimes reading through other people's notes will also be helpful, right? You can also have discussions. I know in many places you have paper discussion sessions with researchers, and this can be a very useful tool that can be used for that. So that's pretty much it from my side. I think I've taken about an hour and a little bit. Thank you. These are some readings I would suggest to some of you. Like I say again, review papers in your fields are really good places, but here are two examples where you can read on the notion of scientific attitude, or some introductory readings on philosophy of science will give you a sense of how we can do that. So I think that's, I think, and like I said, I'm open to questions. If you can circulate the questions or send it to KSTA, I can definitely answer them for you, and we can post it to all of you. That I hope this was useful. I know it's a little dense. It's a little tough to these are things that don't come easily. It's not like you attend one session and you will be able to understand it fully. These are things that take a lot of time to really get the essence of what forms the notion of scientific. But I hope at least you will be able to suggest to young researchers or young people coming out as to why science differs from the other disciplines and the notions of falsifiability, right? So that is a very important. If I were to ask you to take one message from my entire presentation today, I think it is the notion of falsifiability. There are a lot of readings that are available. You should read them up, but I would definitely suggest that you take that away from this particular talk, is the notion of falsifiability in your scientific statements. And I think it's a good example to start thinking about what are falsifiable statements and what are non-falsifiable statements. I think there are a lot of ways in which we can, the unfortunate thing is many of us are very scientific, so we'll always come up with falsifiable statements. But I'm sure when you start listening to people around you in your communities, you will hear people making these statements that are really non-falsifiable. And there are no way to falsify with them. And then you know, okay, wait, I have to be careful of these statements. Right? That's about it.
Sir,
Yes, tell me.
sir, there are some questions, sir. Can you answer it?
Okay, sure. I can take some questions. Let me see. We
Sir, how
can.
many reference papers can be included while writing a research paper?
Just a second. I can't hear you clearly. Can you repeat what you said?
Sir, how many reference papers can be included while writing a research paper? Yeah, the question is from Jaya Bharati.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I will say one thing. Let me just stop sharing. Okay. Let me stop. Yeah. So to be honest with you, there is no hard and fast rule. There is no hard and fast rule on how many papers you need to cite. There are papers with 200 citations, and then you have papers with 2 citations. So I think it should be sufficient to make your case, justify your hypothesis, or justify your statement that you're making, and also justify why you're doing what you're doing, and how it's filling a gap in the field. I think that's a very important thing also, and I think that is what you need to really focus on. I think that is something that you need to focus on. Yeah.
Sir, one more question.
Yes.
Any standard format to prepare papers? From Tara Prakash. Any standard format to prepare paper?
Okay, so I'm just reading through. Let me just try. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I think somebody asked about the induction deduction. I think I'll get back to that later. Yeah, I think these are great questions. These are really great questions. We can spend a lot of time answering all of them. Let me do one thing. Let me see if I can pick up a few questions. I will take up all of these questions and try and answer them and send it to you. I think let me just pick up some very quick ones that I can answer. Let me see. Okay. Okay, so how many reference papers can be included? Yeah, pretty much all. I think I will share the PowerPoint, of course. Standard format to prepare papers, yes, depends upon the journal you're writing to. Different journals have different ways, and you need to look at those journals, look at how they are, and they will have a format in how these papers have to be written. So that's very important. Okay, so this is this. Is there any rule? Let's see. Is there any rule that all the articles collected for the literature needs to have more citation? All articles collected. No. So there is no rule. So you can read a lot of papers, but it's possible that some of the papers are irrelevant to your research question, right? So in which case you don't need to cite them at all. And there is no rule. I think the rules are defined by the journals. You have to go to the journals and see what that rule is. The journals will define the rules to a large extent. So I'll just quickly get into the induction and deduction question. So induction is the notion by which the premise, the statement that you make does not necessarily follow from the statements that you have in the premise or the premises that you have in the past. Deduction is where you do necessarily follow. It necessarily follows. It is almost like a mathematical. Deduction is more mathematical, while induction is more logical. I think if I could say that, induction will mean that you can sample and say, okay, I induce something. But deduction would mean that this is necessarily true, right? And based on the axioms that you have set up. So that is the big difference between induction and deduction. I think that pretty much. Yeah, I think that pretty much Yeah, so then I think there's another good question, is that there may be multiple alternative hypotheses when the null hypothesis is rejected, right? Which is why when you are setting up your research, you need to set up your alternative hypothesis. And that is what the alternative hypothesis that you're choosing. But at the same time, it is important that if there are multiple alternative hypotheses, then you need to find the set of null hypotheses that will get rejected to make sure that your alternative hypothesis is the most logical alternative hypothesis. It does not mean it has proved that. It is just saying that it is the most logical given what we know in the universe, right? So it is very important that you set it up in such a way that you reject all those hypotheses. You reject all those hypotheses that will make sure that a certain alternative hypothesis is the one that is most logical, right? And that's why research keeps continuing, right? You can keep continuing based on. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers it. So Sci-Hub and all is, see, these are all, you're asking me an ethical question. I cannot answer that question for you. It is considered, I mean, so let's start with this, right? I mean, many journals nowadays are open access, which means you can go to the journals and download those papers. There are journals which are not open access. And so hence, you have to find a way to find those papers. Now, there are movements in the scientific world that are saying that we will cite only papers that are open access, right? So that's also possible. And if a journal allows that, then it's possible to do that. You can go only to open access journals, make sure you cite only those journals and put that. So I think there are a bit, you have to be very careful. So that's one thing. So I do not encourage downloading papers from sites that are essentially stealing papers from journals. But I think that is something that each of your organizations will have to decide how to go. And I think yeah, if you have 3 objectives, you have to have a hypothesis for each of your objectives. Absolutely, there's no question there. I don't understand. What is the PICO questions? What is the PICO question? I didn't get that.
Maybe that is previous session, sir.
Okay.
Sir,
Yeah,
we have.
Okay. Fine. I think you guys are running out of time. We have come to 2 o'clock. So I think go ahead.
Sir, we will take the questions offline, sir. We will
yes.
send to you.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sir, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I will definitely take up all these questions. So those who have asked the questions, I will take it up. Zotero, definitely you can go online and do that. So that's thank you very much for the session. I hope it was useful, and look forward to hearing from you. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful answer. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. So, Vivek Sagar, sir, good afternoon.
So very good afternoon, sir.
Sir, how are you, sir?
I'm fine.
Sir. So, how it is going, sir?
Morning. So I'll be ready with my intellectual property rights.
Yes, sir. It is 19th, sir. Your talk will be on 19th.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So you are available at that time. Your talk will be 11:45 to 1:50.
Correct. I'll be ready.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
You are also, I think, listening your slides. Hello.
Yes, sir.
I think you have also listened.
Yes, yes, yes.
How is it, sir?
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful happening. It's really very good. And he has simplified the whole concept and told in brief. I think it was really wonderful and a very informative session. For the research scholars, I think how many times even
Sir?
get this kind of brush up, it is always good for the research scholars or the researchers who is pursuing PhD or preparing to write articles or continuing with the research. It is really a wonderful session. I think these kind of things, even many a times you do it, it does not exhaust, and it will always be useful. And after looking at this, I got various points for me to discuss in the later classes as well, such as the ethical issues or accessing the other sites, or how do you prepare the article without infringing the others' right, especially in the copy, or look after it. So these are the few points we need to be considering while writing an article. And at the same time, if the faculty or the in the field of science or engineering, if they have an idea to go ahead for patenting their intellectual property, or if it is an innovation which is happening there, and it is a right point of time for the researcher or the person who is innovative with those products, has to file patents at the first juncture and only then go for making any publication. Otherwise, as I have already stated in the previous program of KSTA, that if you publish, you are going to perish. So rather you should make patent and then publish, then there is a prosperity. So this is a statement for all the researcher. If you find your molecular or your formula or your chemical formulation which you have come out with novelty, non-obviousness and industrial application, then it is the right time he shall file patent at first and then only go for making any publication. So this is one such point where they have to keep in mind. And science and technology, Karnataka Science and Technology is doing really a great job in this regard, and we are really very happy to be associated with KSTA. And I would also like to convey my regards to Mr. Dr. Ramesh AM and Mr. Umesh sir. Both of them have been supporting in this particular activity, and even for me as well. And I will be ready, sir. I will be ready with the participants. Now, this is the first time I'm coming with the WebEx. I think I got to know about how to handle this as well. So I can be more sure to have an interactive session with the participants. You remember the thing which we did in your auditorium also. But one thing which all the participants they're missing out is the wonderful, beautiful lunch the KSTA used to offer us. Actually, that's the one which I used to miss. Actually, I came in one of the program of KSTA just because there is a wonderful lunch. So, but I'm missing it.
Say. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Purva. Mudita Purva.